Chapter 2332. In the vanishing shadow dark world, Nye Tian's face darkened. He couldn't sense anything beyond 100 meters. He could only feel that there were countless violent auras rushing towards him, but he didn't know what they were. Qianyu's vanishing shadow dark world was terrifying. Not only did it suppress Nye Tian's dragon qi, but it also suppressed his 5 senses to a very weak state. Under such circumstances, Nye Tian seemed to have fallen into darkness. He couldn't judge what was happening in front of him at all. He. The next moment, the shrill cries became clearer, and the violent auras suddenly soared. It was extremely terrifying. Bang, bang, bang. Before Nye Tian could react, he felt countless attacks landing on his dragon body. In an instant, there were countless bloody wounds on his body. Blood gushed out and dyed his body red. Large pieces of dragon scales fell off, and flesh and blood flew everywhere. There was an extremely strong smell of blood in the air. "What the hell is this?" Nye Tian roared. He suddenly stretched out his dragon claw and grabbed something. When he put it in front of him, he saw that it was a black monster with a human body but a ghost face. The monster wasn't big, only dozens of meters tall. However, it released a very terrifying violent aura. Its body was as black as night, and only its eyes were as red as blood. It looked very evil. Ha! Ha! The black monster was caught by Nye Tian. It struggled and screamed. Go to hell! Nye Tian knew that this was the monster that attacked his dragon body. In a rage, he used his dragon claw to crush the black monster. Bang! 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 However, the next moment, his body was hit by countless attacks again. The flesh and blood all over his body exploded, and it was extremely bloody. The dragon qi in his body was overflowing, and his aura was rapidly weakening. Those black monsters were very terrifying. Even the divine dragon body couldn't quickly heal the wounds they cause. If Nye Tian could see his own body at this moment, he would definitely be startled. His body was covered with those black monsters. They were like maggots in his bones, and they were crazily biting at his body. Damn it! Nye Tian could feel his aura slowly weakening. He let out a roar and moved his body, charging towards the sky. He wanted to shake off these black monsters, but he found that these black monsters were extremely strong, and he couldn't shake them off at all. Furthermore, the spirit formation aura in the air greatly strengthened these black monsters, causing them to be in a nearly berserk state. Nye Tian, these little things are called dark soul-splitting demon. Not only can they devour your dragon body, but they can also slowly devour the dragon soul within your body. In the sky, Qianyu's voice resounded out once more, and it was piercingly cold and ghastly. Now, properly enjoy the feeling of your soul being slowly devoured. Nye Tian heard Qianyu's voice but was unable to determine his location. In the vanishing shadow dark world, Qianyu could perfectly conceal himself. Nye Tian couldn't find him at all. At the same time, outside the vanishing shadow dark world, everyone was completely stunned by the scene in front of them. They could only see a boundless black spirit formation floating in the air like a dark abyss. But they couldn't see anything inside the spirit formation, and didn't know what was happening inside. Nye Tian, you must be alright. Qianyu frowned. She couldn't help but worry for Nye Tian. The others also had ugly expressions. QL11, although they didn't know what was happening, Nye Tian was trapped in the spirit formation. His situation clearly wasn't optimistic. Roar. A dragon roar rang out in the vanishing shadow dark world, but it had lost its mighty might. Instead, it sounded like a mournful wail. The soul-splitting dark demons weren't strong, but there were too many of them. They stuck onto Nye Tian's body and kept biting, causing great harm to him. As the saying goes, ants can bite an elephant to death. Even if Nye Tian had boundless dragon energy in his body, he couldn't withstand this endless consumption. Nye Tian kept fighting back. Wherever the dragon claws passed, countless soul-splitting dark demons were torn to pieces. But there were too many soul-splitting dark demons. He couldn't kill them all. Calm down. In danger, Nietian forced himself to calm down and thought, if this goes on, the dragon energy in my body will be used up. I must break the vanishing shadow dark world. He calmed down, and his eyes flashed with a sharp light. The easiest way to break the vanishing shadow dark world was to kill the person who set up the spirit formation. But unfortunately, Nietian couldn't find Ingqianyu's shadow at all. So the stupidest way was to break the spirit formation by force. This spirit formation is too strong. Even if I have the dragon monarch physique, I can't break it directly. Nietian thought. Then, his eyes trembled and joy appeared in his eyes. Divine demon power. At this moment, he thought of the divine demon power. The divine demon power had a natural restraining effect on all spirit formations. But the problem was, could he use the divine demon power in his current state of dragon form? I'll give it a try. Making up his mind, Nietian no longer cared about the soul-splitting dark demons. Instead, he focused on sensing himself. Have you given up resisting? Seeing that Nietian was no longer struggling, Ingqianyu's voice sounded again. He said coldly, "Kid, this is the wisest choice you've made so far." However, as soon as he finished speaking, he sensed something and his expression changed. Ingqianyu hid in the void and faintly sensed an extreme yin and dark energy around Nietian. And this energy was growing stronger and stronger. This kid is going to use the divine demon power. Ingqianyu was very smart and immediately guessed Nietian's plan. His eyes trembled, and there was a hint of panic in them. He knew that the divine demon power could break through any spirit formation, including his absolute shadow dark world. Even if Nietian could not completely release the divine demon embryo's power, as long as the divine demon power slightly weakened the spirit formation, he could use the dragon monarch physique to break through the spirit formation. Don't let him break through the spirit formation. Kill him. In the next moment, Ingqianyu's eyes turned cold. Then, his figure moved, and he stabbed out with his sword, aiming for Nietian. I'll take your life with this sword. Ingqianyu was in midair. His sword fell from the sky, and the sword intent around him gathered in an instant, turning into a boundless sword shadow that blasted towards Nietian. Nietian felt the killing intent approaching, but he ignored it. He knew very well that this was a moment of life and death. He had to stay calm. If he could not break through the absolute shadow dark world, he would die without a doubt. Breaking through the absolute shadow dark world was his last chance. Boom! In an instant, a dark energy suddenly surged out of his body. It was the divine demon power. The moment the divine demon power surged out, it rushed out like a wild snake. Chapter 23:33. Roar! The instant the dragon shadow soared into the sky, an earth-shattering dragon roar reverberated in the space and exploded with the power of thunder. Boom! At that moment, the entire absolute shadow dark world shook, as if it had been hit by a huge impact. Boom! 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 In the next moment, a series of violent muffled sounds rang out in the huge dark boundary. Then, the entire boundary began to shake like a small boat in a stormy sea that was about to collapse. What's going on? What's happening inside the boundary? Everyone's eyes trembled when they saw this scene. They had no idea what was happening. Boom! At that moment, the absolute shadow dark world finally could not withstand the powerful impact and collapsed with a loud bang. It turned into an endless power of darkness that surged into the void. QL11. Almost at the same time, a huge blood-colored figure rushed out of the darkness like a golden ray of light, cutting through the night sky. Nietian! And I Jiaming and the others exclaimed in shock when they saw the blood-colored figure clearly. The figure that rushed out was a golden dragon riddled with scars. Who else could it be but Nietian? At this moment, even though Nietian was still in his golden dragon form, The golden light around him was much dimmer than before, replaced by a blood-colored light. There were countless bloody holes on his body. His entire body was riddled with holes and his flesh was a bloody mess. In particular, there was 100-meter-long wound on his chest, from which blood flowed continuously. However, the dragon scale protecting his heart was not broken. There was only a sword mark on it. Everyone was completely stunned by the scene in front of them. They looked at Nye Tian in shock. They could not imagine what he had experienced in the absolute shadow-dark world. He's not dead. At that moment, a black-robed figure appeared in the sky and stared at Nye Tian with a murderous gaze. He seemed to exclaim in surprise. This black-robed figure was Ying Qianyu. Although he tried his best to stop Nye Tian from breaking through the boundary, he still failed. However, as soon as Nye Tian broke through the ward, his sword still slashed down. The 100-meter-long wound on Nye Tian's chest was left by Ying Qianyu's sword. Ying Qianyu had once directly shattered Di Shi's heart-protecting dragon scales with a single sword strike. However, the same sword strike failed to shatter Nye Tian's dragon scale. From this, it could be seen that Nye Tian's dragon monarch physique was far stronger than Di Shi's. Ying Qianyu, your vanishing shadow-dark world has been broken by me. Nye Tian stabilized his body, and the dragon energy in his body began to surge. The wounds all over his body began to heal at a speed visible to the naked eye. As long as the dragon scales protecting the heart were not broken, the body of a divine dragon would recover quickly, no matter how severe the injury was. Nye Tian, under your dragonized state, you forcefully used the power of the gods and demons. This is a huge blow to your martial body. Ying Qianyu sneered and said, I believe that the current you is already an arrow at the end of its flight, right? Nye Tian's body rolled a little, and the space was immediately filled with a strong smell of blood. At this moment, he was indeed severely injured. Even his dragon monarch physique was on the verge of collapsing. After all, the dragon energy in his body was not inexhaustible. Nye Tian. Everyone looked at Nye Tian with worried eyes, not knowing if the latter could hold on. I don't have much energy left, but it's enough to kill you. Nye Tianling laughed, and the aura of his body skyrocketed again. You still dare to be stubborn when you're at death's door. Ying Qianyu said coldly. The sword aura around his body skyrocketed, and he said coldly, I'll take your life with this sword. Divine Profundity Realm. Jun Chujian could feel the aura of Ying Qianyu's body from afar. His eyes were filled with horror, and he couldn't help but exclaim. Ying Qianyu's sword intent was extremely terrifying and sharp, as if it could break the void with just the sword aura. Such a terrifying sword intent shocked Jun Chujian greatly. He was very sure that Ying Qianyu must be a divine profundity swordsman. He never thought that there would be a divine profundity swordsman in the land of the abandoned. At the same time, Li Guangtongchen looked at Ying Qianyu. He seemed to have noticed something, and his expression became very strange. The corner of his mouth twitched and he murmured, So this Ying Qianyu is... He didn't finish his sentence, but his eyes flickered with a hint of joy. Ying Qianyu's aura, how could it be? Beside Li Guangtongchen, Granny Qianhuan also seemed to have noticed something wrong. She frowned, and her expression became strange. The other people were extremely nervous, and their nerves were stretched to the extreme, and their hearts were in their throats. They knew that the next moment would determine the winner between Nye Tian and Ying Qianyu. Roar! High up in the sky, the golden colossal dragon soared into the sky and roared furiously. The dragon aura around its body skyrocketed, and its golden body was covered with a layer of black energy. That black energy was the divine demon force. This time, not only did Nye Tian use all the remaining dragon aura in his body, but he also forcefully released the divine demon force, which combined with the dragon blood around his body to stimulate the dragon aura and make it even more powerful. Kid, you've gained the recognition of the raw starstone. Ying Qianyu's voice reverberated in the void and he said, It's enough to prove that you're not an ordinary martial artist. What I didn't expect was that your body actually nurtured a powerful dragon vein. Given your current strength, ordinary pseudo-sage experts are no match for you. But unfortunately, your opponent is me, Ingqianyu. You'll soon understand how powerful a divine profundity swordsman is. The divine profundity swordsman is beyond your imagination. A boundlessly violent voice resounded across the 9 heavens, vast and powerful. The aura of the sword intent surrounding Ingqianyu's body skyrocketed at that instant. The sword aura around his body soared into the sky, spreading over 10,000 meters away. His figure was like a giant sword that could shatter the sky, standing firmly between the heavens and earth, as if it would split the heavens and earth apart with a single swing of his sword aura. High up in the sky, the dragon aura around the golden colossal dragon had expanded to its limit, causing the space to turn misty under the influence of the dragon aura. Nie Tian forcefully unleashed the divine demon force, causing the dragon aura to reach an unprecedented level. Following this, it would be his strongest attack. Kill. In the next instant, Ingqianyu's voice could be heard. Following his voice, the sword aura around him instantly crumbled like a 10,000 zhang tall mountain, causing the rift to tremble violently. In the sky, a space crack that spanned over a few thousand meters was formed. Bang! A black shadow of a sword over 10,000 meters long descended from the sky, like a waterfall pouring down toward the golden colossal dragon. Roar! Almost at the same time, a deafening dragon roar could be heard, as the enormous golden colossal dragon began to move. The dragon aura around it was unleashed, causing the shadow of a golden dragon over 10,000 meters long to appear. Chapter 2334. Rumble! Crack! 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 In the sky, the sound of space being torn could be heard constantly. Terrifying space-time storms rushed out of the space like tornadoes, wreaking havoc in the void. The world was dark, and the terrifying and crazy power constantly collided. The space within hundreds of thousands of meters shook violently as if it was going to collapse at any time. Boom! Boom! In the sky, the terrifying black sword shadow and the golden dragon rushed over. They were like the 2 rulers of the world, and they were about to have a terrifying collision. Oh no, retreat! Li Guang and Tongchen suddenly sensed something at this moment. Their expressions changed, and they cried out, "Everyone, go higher! This world is going to collapse!" The voice of the 1,000 illusion granny sounded at almost the same time. She was extremely nervous. The auras of Nie Tian and Ingqianyu were too powerful. The sacred world fragment before them could no longer withstand their power. Moreover, Nie Tian was currently in the body of the golden dragon. The boundless dragon chi around him also greatly weakened the space-time. In fact, it was already a miracle that this piece of land could last until now under the pressure of so many experts. Everyone came to their senses. They moved together and directly flew up into the sky. When the sacred world fragment collapsed, the space would fall into nothingness. In such a space, space-time storms would wreak havoc, and space-time vortexes would devour everything. Even a pseudo-saint expert would find it difficult to survive in such a chaotic space. Everyone rushed up into the sky. The space above was connected to the other sacred world fragments, so it would be a relatively safe area. Boom! At this moment, in the sky, the black sword shadow and the golden dragon finally collided head-on. The space shook and seemed to stop for a moment. In the next moment, an endless amount of energy burst forth, like thousands of sharp blades, rushing in all directions. Crack, crack, crack! In an instant, endless tearing sounds were heard. The surrounding space could no longer withstand the terrifying impact and directly collapsed. Boom! 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 Streaks of space-time storms appeared and directly bombarded the body of the golden dragon, causing bloody wounds. Some of the torn flesh was even directly devoured by the space-time storms. Not good! Nie Tian felt the huge impact on his body and immediately cried out in alarm. Even his expression was one of fear. On the other side, Ing Qianyu's figure was frantically retreating, but the surrounding spatial storm followed him like a shadow. At this time, the sword shadow in the air had been shattered by the spacetime storm. The terrible power exploded in an instant, turning into waves of sword will that raged wildly. Nie Tian forcefully stabilized his body and lowered his head to look down. The scene that entered his eyes made him extremely shocked. The earth had already been completely torn apart. The ground no longer existed, turning into giant boulders that floated in space. They were currently being mercilessly devoured by the space-time storm. Oh no! Suddenly Nie Tian shouted. Zhuozhuo and the others seemed to still be underground. When he thought of this, his expression changed. Then, he moved and rushed down. Nie Tian. Everyone in the sky couldn't help but exclaim when they saw that Nie Tian actually disregarded the impact of the spacetime storm and rushed down. They didn't know why Nie Tian didn't fly up, but instead rushed down. When the sacred world fragment collapsed, the ground below was the first to collapse. Only the sky was the safest. What Nie Tian was doing right now was no different from courting death. Kid, this game is over. It's time for you to die. And at this time, Ing Qianyu looked at Nie Tian, and the corners of his mouth curled up into a cold smile. Then, his figure moved, and he violently stabbed out with his sword. Like a black light, it directly attacked towards Nie Tian. In order to kill Nie Tian, Ing Qianyu actually rushed over as well. It seemed that he wanted to perish together with Nie Tian. Nie Tian's figure rushed down, completely disregarding the spacetime storm around him. His body was already dripping with blood. Large pieces of his flesh and dragon scales were torn apart by the spacetime storm and instantly devoured. If one looked at his figure from afar, he was already on the verge of collapse. His body was covered in large patches of white wounds that were so deep that bones could be seen. However, he didn't care about all this. His eyes searched the collapsed space, trying to find Zhuozhuo and the others. Master Zhuozhuo. Elder Ming. At this time, he saw a group of people standing on a huge rock below. It was Zhuozhuo and the others. At this time, Zhuozhuo and the others relied on Zhuozhuo's formation to resist the impact of the spacetime storm. Their strength wasn't high. Even Ming Jianyu only had the strength of a half-saint. If a half-saint was exposed to the spacetime storm, they would be killed instantly. Nie Tian saw that the formation around Zhuozhuo and the others was already riddled with cracks and was about to collapse at any time. Hold on! With a low roar, Nie Tian's figure rushed forward. However, at this moment, a huge piece of earth with a radius of 10,000 meters appeared above his body and pressed down on him like a mountain. Rumble! Nie Tian swung his dragon tail with great force, shattering the huge chunk of earth. Then, he rushed toward Zhuozhuo and the others. Master Zhuozhuo! Nie Tian's figure arrived. His eyes flickered as he looked at Zhuozhuo and the others. He was thinking about how to save them. Zhuozhuo and the others were too weak. They couldn't withstand the impact of the spacetime storm at all. Once they were exposed, they would definitely die. You're Nie Tian? Zhuozhuo looked at the golden dragon in front of her and couldn't believe her eyes. It was as if she was dreaming. Yes. Master Zhuozhuo, quickly enter the 9 extremities. Nie Tian didn't explain anything. After nodding, he released the last bit of dragon qi in his body and forcibly opened up a space. He took out the 9 extremities and let Zhuozhuo and the others enter. Okay. Zhuozhuo and the others entered the 9 extremities without hesitation. However, at this moment, Ming Jianyu's eyes flickered and he exclaimed, "Watch out!" Before he could finish his sentence, a sharp black sword shadow descended from the sky and landed with a loud bang. Bang! Nie Tian didn't even have time to react before the dragon's scale protecting his chest shattered into pieces. His dragon qi was too weak at the moment. Moreover, the dragon's scale protecting his chest had already been severely damaged. This time, it couldn't withstand the impact and was directly shattered. Nie Tian suddenly raised his head and looked at the black figure in midair. He didn't expect Ing Qianyu to be so ruthless as to rush down just to kill him. Nie Tian, accept your death obediently. Ing Qianyu sneered and raised the long sword in his hand. Without hesitation, he slashed down with his sword. The sword's shadow was like a mountain, sharp as the wind, and full of murderous intent. Nie Tian forcefully opened up a space to prevent Ming Jianyu and the others from being hit by the spacetime storm. He had no spare energy to resist Ing Qianyu's attack. In the next instant, a shocking scene took place. Chapter 2335. Nie Tian's figure was pierced through by the sword. His enormous figure was instantly dyed red with blood. Upon seeing this, Ming Jianyu let out a wail, his whole body trembling uncontrollably. Nie Tian! Don't worry about me, enter the 9 extremities. Nie Tian's divine sense was still conscious as he spoke with great difficulty. Ming Jianyu collected his thoughts and stepped into the 9 extremities. Nie Tian's lips curled into a grin when he saw that the last person had entered the 9 extremities. He showed no sign of fear at that moment. All he had was an icy, murderous intent. Even though his body was pierced through, his aura remained ferocious. Still not dead yet? Ing Qianyu's figure was surrounded by a terrifying ultimate shadow force, which formed a ultimate shadow barrier to protect him from the spatial storm. He fixed his gaze on Nie Tian. He did not expect the latter to survive after being pierced by his sword. He could even sense the murderous intent and battle intent in Nie Tian's eyes. A person who was in a hopeless situation was not showing despair, but battle intent. It was utterly terrifying. You're the ultimate Shadow Hall master, right? Nie Tianling let out a laugh. His enormous figure shuddered as he spoke in a deep voice. You won't be leaving this place today. What a joke. Ing Qianyu let out a hollow laugh and said coldly, Do you really think you can fight me in your current state? I'm not killing you now because I'm waiting for you to regain your human form, so I can retrieve the Origin Star Stone in your body. The Origin Star Stone is the foundation of the sacred realm. It's a joke for a piece of trash like you to have it. Only an expert like me is worthy of owning the Origin Star Stone. The icy voice was filled with extreme insolence. Ing Qianyu's eyes were filled with an icy murderous intent. He was waiting for the dragon qi in Nie Tian's body to completely disappear, allowing him to regain his human form, so that he could retrieve the Origin Star Stone. He was only interested in Nie Tian for the Origin Star Stone in his body. In his opinion, the Origin Star Stone was the cornerstone of the sacred world. It was a complete waste for it to fall into Nie Tian's hands. In this world, only he, Ing Qianyu, was worthy of owning an Origin Star Stone. Suddenly, Nie Tian let out a cold laugh. Are you really that confident? Ing Qianyu was stunned for a moment. He felt that Nie Tian's smile was very strange, and it actually made him shudder. The next moment, Nie Tian made a shocking move. His body shuddered violently as the dragon qi in his body began to leak out. At the same time, his blood qi surged and filled the air. Boom, boom, boom. Subsequently, the surrounding space was impacted by the dragon qi, and countless space-time storms that were thousands of meters in size were formed, surrounding Ing Qianyu. Stinking brat, have you gone mad? In an instant, Ing Qianyu reacted, and he cried out in alarm while his eyes trembled incessantly. Nie Tian ignited his dragon blood and stimulated the dragon qi, causing a great impact on the surrounding space to increase the power of the space-time storms. The space-time here was already collapsing, and now that it was impacted by the dragon qi, the space-time storms became even more terrifying. Nie Tian knew that he no longer had the strength to kill Ing Qianyu, so he had to use the space-time storms to kill Ing Qianyu. However, by doing so, he would perish together with Ing Qianyu. His current state was close to his limit. Igniting his dragon blood was equivalent to exhausting the last of his life force, and releasing the dragon chi would also make him lose the last bit of his strength. At this moment, the terrifying space-time storms in the surroundings could not only kill Ing Qianyu, but also Nie Tian. Ing Qianyu, even if I die, I won't let you live. Nie Tianling smiled coldly, and the dragon blood in his body began to burn even more violently, and the dragon chi overflowed wildly. Boom! 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 The space-time storms in the surroundings became even more terrifying, and were actually as large as 10,000 meters, like a tornado, entrenched in the surroundings. Lunatic, you're a lunatic! Ing Qianyu shouted. He had never thought that Nie Tian would actually do this. Unfortunately, at this moment, it was already impossible for him to escape. The extremely terrifying space-time storms had already surrounded him. Ing Qianyu, you've destroyed so many races, you're the real lunatic. The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched into a cold smile. The dragon blood and dragon chi in his body had finally been exhausted. His body trembled violently and was rapidly shrinking. With the dragon chi exhausted, he was about to return to his human form. In his human form, Nie Tian could not possibly withstand the space-time storms. The powerful space-time pressure in the surroundings would instantly crush his body. Seeing this scene, Ing Qianyu's eyes lit up with joy and he exclaimed, "He's returning to his human form." As long as Nie Tian returned to his human form, he would be able to get the raw star stone. Bang! However, at this moment, the vanishing shadow shield around him could no longer withstand the impact of the space-time storms, and with a loud bang, it collapsed. Ing Qianyu immediately came to his senses, and his eyes suddenly trembled, and a look of horror appeared on his face. Although he was a pseudo-saint expert, his body was made of flesh and blood, after all. With the vanishing shadow shield broken, his physical body and martial body were completely unable to withstand the impact of the space-time storms. The moment death befell him, Ing Qianyu shouted, "My raw star stone!" His heart was still concerned about the raw star stone. He was only one step away from the raw star stone, but this step would be the end of his life. Nie Tian, we'll meet again. In the next moment, the space-time storms suddenly pressed down on him. Ing Qianyu's eyes trembled, and the corner of his mouth actually raised into a strange smile. Bang! Immediately, his body directly collapsed and turned into a ball of black smoke and disappeared. Almost at the same time, Nie Tian felt that his body had returned to his human form. He felt a heart-wrenching pain all over his body, and the boundless pressure around him was also pressing down on him. "I can't die." A voice struggled in his mind, but he had completely lost control of his body. Boom! The space-time storms suddenly pressed down violently. At this moment of life and death, Nie Tian suddenly felt an endless stream of dragon chi appear, and it forcibly broke through the space-time storms. Nie Tian. At this moment, a mighty voice sounded in his ears. "Brother Di Shi." Nie Tian's eyes trembled, and he actually saw a golden figure appear in front of him. It was Di Shi. "I've come at the right time." Di Shi released the dragon chi, which shrouded Nie Tian, and his huge body soared into the sky. Di Shi was also seriously injured, but with the body of the golden dragon, he barely resisted the space-time storms, and his figure dashed out like a golden ray. In just the blink of an eye, Di Shi's figure appeared high up in the sky, and his golden body was already dripping with blood. But in the end, he successfully rescued Nie Tian. Nie Tian. High up in the sky, everyone cried out in surprise when they saw Di Shi and Nie Tian return. Nie Tian stood up with difficulty, and when he saw that everyone was still alive, the corner of his mouth raised into a gratified smile. This earth-shattering battle had destroyed a fragment of the sacred realm. But in the end, the person who survived was still Nie Tian. However, Nie Tian was very curious about what Ing Qianyu meant when he said, "We'll meet again," before he died. Chapter 2336. Nie Tian thought of Ing Qianyu's last words and could not help but frown. However, he did not continue thinking about it because he was too weak at the moment. He had reached his limit and was in urgent need of rest. Below them, time and space were still collapsing. The world had already fallen into nothingness and chaos. It was truly the end of the world. Lord Di Shi, let's leave this place first. And I Jiaming looked at Di Shi and said solemnly. Everyone glanced at the world below and didn't linger any longer. They all leaped onto Di Shi's body and left. The Forsaken Land was formed by countless fragments of the sacred realm. Moreover, every fragment of the sacred realm was independent of each other. They were only connected to each other at the weakest point. The greatest advantage of such a world was that the collapse of one fragment of the sacred realm would not affect another fragment of the sacred realm. Nie Tian and the rest quickly arrived at another fragment of the sacred realm. They came to a continuous mountain range and found a wide canyon to temporarily stay. In this battle, Nie Tian and the rest were seriously injured and needed rest. 3 days later, Nie Tian recovered from his serious injuries. Li Guang Tongchen, Granny Thousand Illusions, and the rest had also more or less recovered. At this moment, Nie Tian and the rest were standing in the canyon. Indra and Jian Qingqi were preparing to leave. Indra, Sword Elder, have you decided to stay in the Forsaken Land to train? Nie Tian had more or less recovered and asked Indra and Jian Qingqi. Although the current Jian Qingqi did not remember what Nie Tian had done, Nie Tian was still used to calling him Sword Elder. Yes. Jian Qingqi nodded and said with a smile, this place is even vaster than the 9 domains we are in. If not for you, I might never have been able to come here. Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, since you've already made up your mind, I won't stop you. Just be careful. Jian Qingqi and Indra smiled faintly and did not stay for long. They turned around and left. Nie Tian looked at the 2 figures with a faint smile on his face. It was not strange that Jian Qingqi and Sakura had decided to stay in the Forsaken Land. He believed that any martial practitioner from the 9 realms would choose to stay in the Land of the Abandoned. This was a world much vaster than the 9 major realms, and the limits of martial practitioners were also much higher than the 9 major realms. It was no exaggeration to say that a first-rate expert in the Forsaken Land was a peak existence in the 9 major realms. Nie Tian had only been in the Forsaken Land for a few months, but he had already seen quite a few pseudo-sage powerhouses. From this, it could be seen how powerful the Forsaken Land was. Jian Qingqi and Sakura staying in the Forsaken Land would be beneficial to their future growth. Both of them were talented swordsmen, and their achievements in the future would not be any worse than the peak swordsmen of the Forsaken Land. Nie Tian, it's time for I to leave. Jun Chujian walked over at this moment and said with a smile. However, his smile was filled with unconcealable bitterness. Alliance leader, do you really not want to see Jun Ouching? Nie Tian looked at Jun Chujian and asked with a frown. He had already asked Jun Chujian before, but the latter did not want to see Jun Ouching. I won't see her for the time being. Jun Chujian smiled bitterly and said, Ouching is still young and weak. There are some things that will be a heavier burden for her if I tell her now. Don't tell her that I'm here. If she hates me, then let her hate me. Nie Tian frowned and nodded slightly. It could be seen that Jun Chujian had something that was difficult to say. However, since Jun Chujian was unwilling to say it, Nie Tian did not ask too much. It was better not to see Jun Chujian and Jun Ouching at this moment. After that, Jun Chujian bade farewell to Li Guang and Tongchen and left. Zhuozhuo, Gale Xiao Xiao and the others also took their leave. At this time, there were fewer and fewer people in the canyon. Li Guang, we have to leave too. At this time, the Thousand Illusions granny walked up and said with a faint smile. Beside her stood Rui Qianyu and Nieyuro. It was obvious that she wanted to take Rui Qianyu and Nieyuro with her. Thousand Illusions granny, must you take Rui Qianyu and Yuro with you? Nie Tian frowned. He did not want Rui Qianyu and Nieyuro to leave his side. Kid, with your current strength, do you think it's better for the two girls to follow you or this granny? The Thousand Illusions granny raised her eyes and asked bluntly. Nie Tian was silent for a moment, not knowing what to say. The Thousand Illusions granny's meaning was clear. It was obviously better for Rui Qianyu and Nieyuro to follow her. And Nie Tian also knew that the Thousand Illusions granny's words were not wrong. But he was not sure if Rui Qianyu and Nieyuro were willing to follow the Thousand Illusions granny. Kid, this is what this granny and Li Guang agreed on. This granny will help you, and Ruoyu and Ro will stay by my side. The Thousand Illusions granny saw that Nie Tian did not speak and smiled. You're not thinking of going back on your word, are you? Thousand Illusions granny must be joking. Nie Tian laughed bitterly and shook his head. With my current strength, do I have the right to go back on my word? It's good that you know this. The Thousand Illusions granny laughed and looked at Rui Qianyu and Nieyuro. Ruoyu, Ro, I'll give you some time to say your goodbyes. This granny will wait for you outside. As she spoke, the Thousand Illusions granny turned and walked out of the canyon. Li Guang and Tong Chen also followed. Ming Jianyu and Mizuhara Kaori also walked out of the canyon, not wanting to disturb Nie Tian and the others. Rui Qianyu came to Nie Tian's side, while Nieyuro walked towards Zenai Jianming. Nie Tian, I can't always be by your side. To be able to become the Thousand Illusions granny's disciple is my chance. Rui Qianyu looked at Nie Tian and smiled gently. Please believe me. The next time we meet, I will no longer be your burden, but your support. I believe you. Nie Tian nodded slightly and smiled. Indeed, with Rui Qianyu's talent, becoming the Thousand Illusions granny's disciple would be very beneficial to her future development. It was rumored that the rainbow pupils were the most suitable pupils for illusions, and the Thousand Illusions granny was a pinnacle illusionist. QL11 It was the same for Nieyuro. She was a dual attribute cultivator of light and wind. Furthermore, she had the Thousand Mirage seal in her body. She was practically a natural-born illusionist. Perhaps the next time Nie Tian saw the two of them, they would already be top-notch illusionists. A moment later, Nie Tian and the others walked out of the canyon. The Thousand Illusions granny left with Rui Qianyu and Nieyuro. The three of them disappeared in the blink of an eye. Nie Tian couldn't help but feel a little disappointed as he looked in the direction where the three of them disappeared. He could only look forward to the next time they met. Nie Tian, you're also leaving the Forsaken Lands, right? Li Guang and Tong Chen looked at Nie Tian and said lightly. Nie Tian nodded and smiled bitterly. If I continue to stay here, I'm afraid I'll be pursued endlessly. It's better to leave as soon as possible. His purpose for coming to the Forsaken Lands had been achieved. Now was the time to leave. Chapter 23:37. When Nie Tian heard Li Guangtongchen's question, he was briefly stunned before his face changed. Ing Qianyu was still alive. This was something that he couldn't figure out. Previously, he had personally witnessed Ing Qianyu being torn apart by the spatial storm. However, before Ing Qianyu died, a weird smile appeared on his face, and he claimed that he would meet Nie Tian again. Senior, I've also been puzzled by your question for a long time. Nie Tian became cold as he narrated the scene before Ing Qianyu's death. It looks like my guess was right. Li Guangtongchen couldn't help smiling when he heard Nie Tian's words. The Hall Master of the Juying Divine Palace truly doesn't die so easily. What do you mean? Nie Tian was briefly stunned before he pursued. Ing Qianyu really isn't dead? Yeah. The corners of Li Guangtongchen's lips curled into a bitter smile. He nodded and said, previously, I suspected that Ing Qianyu's strength was a little weak. He wasn't as strong as I thought. But when he fought with you, I noticed that his aura was fluctuating and changing. Such a change shouldn't appear on a pseudo-sacred realm expert. So I guessed that the Ing Qianyu you fought wasn't his main body, but a clone. Clone? When Ye Tian and Anai Jiaming heard Li Guangtongchen's words, they were stunned before they exclaimed, "Clone! How could they have imagined that the Ying Qianyu from before was just a clone?" It was hard to imagine that a clone would be so powerful. When Ye Tian fought with Ying Qianyu, he could clearly sense that the latter's strength was on a higher level than the heavenly evil monarch and Huan Chui Lai. But now, Li Guangtongchen was telling him that the Ying Qianyu he fought was just a clone. How could he accept that? If Ying Qianyu's clone was so terrifying, then he couldn't imagine how powerful his main body was. "Actually, I was only guessing before this." Li Guangtongchen nodded his head with a smile. "But when I told Qianhuan about my guess, she also noticed it and had the same doubt in her heart. Now, add the scene you saw before Ying Qianyu died. I'm certain that the Ying Qianyu we saw was only a clone." This. Nye Tian and Ni Jiaming gasped at the same time and were speechless for a long time. Ying Qianyu lived up to his reputation as the lord of the Juying Divine Palace. A mere clone was so terrifying. At that moment, Nye Tian finally understood how terrifying an organization the Juying Temple was. Ni Jiaming, do you know what the limit of Ying Qianyu's strength is? After a moment, Nye Tian became cold and couldn't help but ask Ni Jiaming. Ni Jiaming and Ying Qianyu had known each other for a long time, so he should have a certain understanding of the latter. "I don't know." Unexpectedly, Ni Jiaming shook his head and said with a bitter smile, "I've only met Ying Qianyu a few times. Regarding this part of the memory, my divine sense is still very vague. Right now, I only have a rough impression of Ying Qianyu. As for how strong this person is, I really don't know." Ni Jiaming was a person who had experienced countless reincarnations. Even though his strength had reached the supreme god realm, he still hadn't completely awakened the memories of his previous life. Therefore, he only had vague impressions of many things. Nye Tian's face grew solemn when he heard Ni Jiaming's words. He even felt that Ying Qianyu's original body was most likely a legendary sage. However, this was only his guess and he couldn't prove it. Ying Qianyu is a divine profound swordsman. What we saw was most likely his profound doppelganger. Li Guangtongchen frowned and said in a low voice. Profound doppelganger. Nye Tian was stunned when he heard this name. He only knew that divine sword body realm swordsman could form soul doppelganger, and the doppelganger's ability was no different from the original body. According to Li Guangtongchen, it seemed that divine profound swordsman could form profound doppelganger. However, the soul doppelganger of a swordsman was no weaker than the original body. Profound doppelganger was obviously stronger than the soul doppelganger. Could it be that the profound doppelganger was a doppelganger that was stronger than the original body? A doppelganger that was stronger than the original body sounded a little ridiculous. Li Guangtongchen could tell what Nye Tian was thinking. He smiled and said, "The profound doppelganger has the same ability as the original body. However, the profound doppelganger is stronger than the soul doppelganger. If the soul doppelganger of a swordsman is destroyed, the foundation of his sword Dao will be damaged, and his sword Dao will fall. However, the destruction of the profound doppelganger will not affect the swordsman's original body. After the profound doppelganger is formed, it is very independent and can do whatever it wants under the control of the original body. The biggest difference between the soul doppelganger and the profound doppelganger is that the soul doppelganger cannot exist without the original body, but the profound doppelganger can. Therefore, the appearance of Ying Qianyu's profound doppelganger doesn't mean that he has been here. But he knows everything about this place." Li Guang and Tong Chen spoke in one breath, their faces involuntarily revealing a look of shock. Ying Qianyu was too cunning. He let the profound doppelganger appear, while his original body stayed behind the scenes and controlled everything. More importantly, the profound doppelganger's battle strength was not weaker than the original body. One had to admit that Ying Qianyu was really a cunning old fox. If his original body appeared this time, he might really die in the hands of Nyetian. The profound doppelganger is so abnormal? Nyetian was stunned for a few seconds before he reacted and said, "If a profound swordsman could continuously form profound doppelganger, wouldn't it be heaven-defying?" The profound doppelganger was not weaker than the swordsman's original body. To a certain extent, the profound doppelganger's battle strength was even more terrifying than the swordsman's original body. After all, when the swordsman's original body attacked, he would have to worry about something. However, the profound doppelganger was not afraid of death and did not need to worry about anything. If a profound swordsman could continuously form profound doppelganger, wouldn't he be able to challenge countless pseudo-sacred realm experts? Li Guangtongchen laughed and said, "The profound doppelganger is indeed terrifying, but it's not easy for a profound swordsman to form a profound doppelganger. It would consume a large amount of sword intent, divine consciousness, and blood qi." The death of Ing Qianyu's profound doppelganger was a huge blow to him. Nyetian let out a long breath and said with a smile, "So that's how it is. If a profound swordsman could form an unlimited number of profound doppelganger, it would be too abnormal. If the strength of the profound doppelganger is the same as the original body, it seems that Ing Qianyu's strength has not reached the sage realm." Nyetian laughed and said calmly, "Of course, it's impossible for a sage to appear in this abandoned land." Li Guangtongchen smiled and said, "If Ing Qianyu was a sage, he wouldn't be so desperate for the raw star stones." Chapter 2338. "Senior, are you all right?" Nyetian couldn't help but ask when he saw Li Guangtongchen's strange behavior. And Ai Jiaming also looked at Li Guangtongchen in confusion, but he didn't speak. "So you're the Dragon Rebel clan's lord," Li Guangtongchen said with a faint smile. "I didn't expect the Dragon Rebel Saint Lord to still be alive. Do we know each other?" And Ai Jiaming asked with a frown. Although his memory hadn't fully awakened, he could feel that he and Li Guangtongchen didn't know each other. "We don't know each other, but I know a little about the Dragon Rebel clan." Li Guangtongchen smiled faintly. "I think that the Juying Temple came to you because of the dragon's spring vein." "How do you know?" And Ai Jiaming asked in surprise. Nyetian was also stunned. He looked at Li Guangtongchen strangely. Li Guangtongchen seemed to be very familiar with the dragon's spring vein. Li Guangtongchen's gaze swept across Nyetian and Ai Jiaming as he said, "From the looks of it, the two of you probably don't know the essence of the dragon's spring vein." The nature of the dragon's spring vein. Nyetian and Ai Jiaming exclaimed at the same time. They really didn't know what the dragon's spring vein was. But Ai Jiaming already knew that the Juying Temple had come to the Dragon Rebel clan for the dragon's spring vein. For the sake of the dragon's spring vein, the Dragon Rebel clan had massacred all the other clans in the 9 realms. They had even destroyed the Divine Dragon clan. The Divine Dragon clan was known as the strongest clan below the Saints. But the Dragon Rebel clan was the Divine Dragon clan's nemesis. But Ai Jiaming hadn't given the dragon's spring vein to the Juying Temple. Instead, he had divided it into 6 parts and given them to the Guardian clans for safekeeping. Even now, the Juying Temple had yet to obtain the dragon's spring vein. The dragon's spring vein is the same as the raw star stones. It's a cornerstone of the sacred realm, Li Guangtongchen said, looking at Nyetian and Ai Jiaming. A cornerstone of the sacred realm. Nyetian and Ai Jiaming exclaimed at the same time, then froze. Neither of them had imagined that the dragon spring vein was also a cornerstone of the sacred world. This was especially true for Nyetian. He was even more astonished, because there was a sacred world foundation stone in his body, the origin star stone. Who would have thought that the dragon spring vein was actually a cornerstone of the saint's world? However, what puzzled Nyetian was that he had no concept of the sacred world's cornerstone. Based on his guess, the sacred world cornerstone should be an essential item to create a sacred world, and it could maintain the existence of a sacred world. Apart from that, He knew nothing about the foundation stones of the saint's world. And Jiaming was surprised as well. His understanding of the foundation stones of the saint's world paled in comparison to Nie Tian. Senior, what exactly is the sacred world cornerstone? Nie Tian became cold. He asked, are the dragon spring veins and the origin star stones the same as the foundation of the saint's world? The foundation stone of a holy world is the thing that creates and supports a holy world. As for its essence and where it comes from, I don't know either. Li Guangtongchen shook his head with a smile. He looked at Nie Tian with shining eyes. Perhaps you'll understand what the origin star stone is when you become the Starry Sky sacred leader. With that, Li Guangtongchen's eyes flickered. Nie Tian, let June Ouching out for a moment. I want to see the dragon spring vein in her body. Nie Tian had told Li Guangtongchen everything about June Ouching in simple terms. Nie Tian nodded. He took out the 9 extremities and let June Ouching out. Nie Tian. June Ouching walked out of the 9 extremities. Her expression was much calmer. She had been in the 9 extremities for the past few days, so she had no idea what was happening in the outside world. She's fused with the dragon's spring vein. And Jiaming exclaimed the moment he saw June Ouching. At that moment, he even thought that he was seeing things. A person without a dragon vein had actually fused with the dragon's spring vein. Moreover, June Ouching had fused with the largest portion of the dragon's spring vein. She had fused with half of the dragon's spring vein. And Jiaming couldn't believe it. How had June Ouching done it? In the next moment, he suddenly thought of something. His expression changed to one of shock. June Ouching had fused with the dragon's spring vein. Didn't that mean that she would become an envoy of the divine dragon in the future? This made Jiaming inexplicably afraid. He could vaguely sense that the shocking chess game he had set up a long time ago was about to usher in an unexpected change. He still hadn't completely remembered what he had done back then. But at that moment, he felt inexplicably worried. It really is the dragon's spring vein. Li Guangtongchen's eyes lit up when he saw June Ouching. He smiled. Judging from the aura of the dragon's spring vein, it is indeed a cornerstone of the sacred world. No wonder the Juying Divine Palace is trying so hard to obtain the dragon's spring vein. Nie Tian was taken aback, but he immediately understood. Senior, do you mean that the Juying Divine Palace is plundering the sacred world's cornerstones? The origin star stones and the dragon's spring vein were both cornerstones of the sacred world. The Juying Divine Palace wanted them both. Clearly, the Juying Divine Palace was collecting the cornerstones of the sacred world. Li Guangtongchen nodded and said, I also know very little about the Juying Temple. But I am very sure that this organization is indeed collecting cornerstones of the sacred world. As for what their purpose is, I don't know either. QL11 said. With that, Li Guangtongchen's eyes flickered as he looked at June Ouching. He smiled. Judging from the aura of the dragon's spring vein, it should be a supporting cornerstone. Supporting cornerstone? Nie Tian and Jiaming were stunned at the same time. They had strange expressions, not understanding what a supporting cornerstone meant. Could the sacred world's cornerstones be different? Li Guangtongchen smiled and said, the support of a saint's world is made up of a main foundation stone and several supporting foundations. The main and supporting cornerstones support a sacred world together. For a sacred world, the main cornerstone is indispensable. The supporting cornerstones are slightly weaker. But if the sacred world does not have a supporting cornerstone, it will be unstable. With that, Li Guangtongchen looked at Nie Tian. The origin star stones are a main cornerstone, while the dragon spring vein is a supporting cornerstone. I see. Nie Tian and Jiaming nodded at the same time, understanding a little. Judging from the main and supporting cornerstones, the origin star stones were much stronger than the dragon spring vein. At that moment, Nie Tian had a guess. Did the origin star stones and the dragon spring vein come from the same sacred world? If the origin star stones were the main cornerstone of the star-sacred world, then could the dragon's spring vein be a supporting cornerstone? If that was the case, then there must be other supporting cornerstones in the star-sacred world, but where were they? As far as I know, the Juying Shrine is also searching for something other than the origin star stones and the dragon's spring vein, Li Guangtongchen said again, his eyes shining with a sharp light. What is it? Nie Tian and Ni Jianming asked at the same time, their eyes blazing. The 9 great origins, Li Guangtongchen said in a low voice. Upon hearing these words, Nie Tian's expression flickered, and his expression froze. 9 origins? There were currently 2 kinds of origins in his body. The earth origin, the vein of the earth, and the darkness heart, the darkness origin. Chapter 2339. Hearing Li Guangtongchen suddenly mention the 9 great sources, Nie Tian couldn't help but be stunned. He had never imagined that the people of the Juying Shrine would be searching for the 9 great sources. The people of the Juying Shrine were searching for raw star stones and dragon spring veins. These 2 things were the foundation stones of the holy world. Could it be that the 9 great sources were also the foundation stones of the holy world? Nie Tian didn't know what the foundation stones of the holy world were, so it wasn't strange that the 9 great sources were the foundation stones of the holy world. QL11 At that moment, Li Guangtongchen turned to Nie Tian and asked, Nie Tian, you have 2 kinds of origin power within you, right? Yes, the earth source and the darkness source. Nie Tian nodded and didn't hide anything. But these 2 source powers are not complete. Li Guangtongchen looked at Nie Tian and frowned deeply. He seemed to want to say something, but in the end he didn't say anything. Senior, if the Juying Shrine is searching for the 9 great sources, are the 9 great sources also the foundation stones of the holy world? Nie Tian couldn't help but ask, puzzled. I don't know either. Li Guangtongchen shook his head slightly and sighed softly. He seemed to think of something and said, It is said that the Juying Shrine once sent the 9 great clans to the 9 great domains to search for the 9 great sources. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed when he heard Li Guangtongchen's words. His expression changed instantly. The Juying Shrine had sent the 9 great clans to search for the 9 great sources. This news was very shocking to Nie Tian. He had a shocking guess. The 9 great clans that Li Guangtongchen spoke of were most likely the 9 great clans of the 9 great domains of the 9 great domains. Before, Nie Tian had noticed that the 9 great clans of the 9 great domains seemed to have a very close connection with the 9 great sources. Nie Tian had an earth vein source in his body, so he had been hunted down by the Zhou family, one of the 9 great clans. As for the Xianyuan family, he had met another of the 9 great clans. The swordsman of this family, Xianyuan Yunsong, was someone who had fused with the origin of wind, the storm pole. Moreover, the Qi-Wu clan of the 9 great clans had a close relationship with the darkness origin source. Jian Qingqi was a member of the Jian family and had once fused with the fire origin power. Deducing from this, perhaps the other aristocratic families corresponded to other origin powers. The more Nie Tian thought about it, the more he felt that it was possible. At this moment, he thought of something else. When Ing Qianyu had first seen him, he had told him that he was from the Nie clan of the 9 realms. Putting all the information together, Nie Tian was almost certain that the 9 great clans of creation were the 9 great clans that the Juying Shrine had sent back then. Nie Tian, are you okay? Li Guangtongchen couldn't help but ask when he saw Nie Tian's strange expression. I'm fine. Nie Tian waved his hand and calmed down a little. He didn't voice out his guesses. He wanted to solve all the mysteries himself. Nie Tian, if the Juying Shrine is looking for the 9 great origins. Li Guangtongchen frowned and said, This means that the 9 great origins are very important to them. After you return to the 9 realms, if possible, find a way to collect the 9 great origins. Nie Tian nodded. Li Guangtongchen was thinking the same thing as him. The things that the Juying Shrine wanted were definitely good things. How could Nye Tian let them go? Senior, will you continue to stay in the abandoned land? Nye Tian asked Li Guangtongchen. I will stay here and investigate the Jueying Shrine. Before you return, I will do my best to find out why the Jueying Shrine is collecting the Sacred World Foundation stones. Li Guangtongchen nodded. Of course, he wouldn't return to the Nine Realms with Nye Tian. As they had said before, Nye Tian's growth depended on himself. Too much interference from outsiders would only make Nye Tian weaker. And Jiaming, what about you? What do you plan to do next? Nye Tian nodded and asked an Jiaming. I will stay here and continue to look for other dragon spring veins. An Jiaming smiled bitterly and said, I did a lot of wrong things back then. I must find a way to make up for it. Nye Tian nodded with a smile and said, I hope that the next time we meet, I will be able to see a complete dragon rebel Saint Lord. I hope so. An Jiaming smiled as well. He was even more eager to fully awaken the memories of his previous life. Nye Tian, how do you feel now? An Jiaming seemed to think of something and suddenly asked. Nye Tian's eyes flickered when he heard an Jiaming's question. He frowned and said, I have almost recovered. There is nothing wrong with my martial body. I don't know why, but the dragon vein seal in my body has disappeared. So that's the case. An Jiaming's eyes trembled. He already knew that something like this would happen to Nye Tian. He said with a serious expression, the Dragon Emperor of the Golden Dragons has completely disappeared from this world. What do you mean? Nye Tian was stunned and confused. An Jiaming said in a deep voice, Your dragonification was actually stimulated by the Dragon Emperor's soul. That's why you completely unleashed the power of the Dragon Vein Seal and inherited the Dragon Emperor's power. But the combination of the Dragon Soul and the Dragon Body is an irreversible process. When the Dragon Emperor's Dragon Chi is completely consumed, the Dragon Emperor's soul and the Dragon Vein Seal will disappear together. So, your dragonification was actually the last time the Dragon Emperor showed up. Nye Tian frowned and suddenly thought of a scene. When Di Shi saw his dragonified body and realized that he was Nye Tian instead of the Dragon Emperor, he immediately shed tears. At that time, Di Shi already knew that it was the last time he saw the Dragon Emperor. Nye Tian did not expect that his dragonification would come at the cost of the Dragon Emperor's complete disappearance. At this moment, his heart was very heavy. Nye Tian, in that situation, you and I had no choice. Releasing the Dragon Emperor's power was our only chance. An Jiaming looked at Nye Tian and said in a deep voice, the Dragon Emperor's disappearance is already destined. It's just a matter of time. His dragon soul has been imprisoned in the Spirit Dragon Emperor ring for too long. Even the Dragon Spring Vein can't resurrect him. I have already explained this matter to Lord Di Shi. You don't have to feel guilty. Nye Tian nodded bitterly and felt a little better. The disappearance of the Dragon Vein Seal also meant that Nye Tian would never be able to dragonify again. He would not be able to use that almost heaven-defying power again. But at this time, the person who was the most heartbroken was not Nye Tian, but Di Shi. An Jiaming, is Big Brother Di Shi's injury okay? Suddenly thinking of Di Shi, Nye Tian could not help but ask. An Jiaming let Di Shi leave 3 days ago. No one knew where he went. Lord Di Shi's heart-protecting dragon scale was broken, and he was seriously injured. An Jiaming nodded slightly and said, but he has already merged with the Qilin's precious blood. As long as he recuperates for a period of time, the heart-protecting dragon scale will heal. Qilin's precious blood. Nye Tian was stunned, and his eyes could not help but tremble. The Qilin's precious blood was a sacred item of the Dragon Rebel clan. An Jiaming actually let Di Shi merge with the Qilin's precious blood. Perhaps An Jiaming felt guilty towards the Dragon clan. Di Shi merging with the Qilin's precious blood was a kind of compensation. Chapter 2340. I'm leaving now. Nye Tian's gaze swept across Li Guangtongchen and An Jiaming as he said with a faint smile. After confirming that she was safe, he was completely relieved. It was time to leave the land of the Forsaken. Nye Tian had benefited a lot from this trip to the land of the Forsaken. It wasn't just the improvement of his strength. More importantly, his horizons were much broader than before. In the past, the only top experts he had ever met were peak paramount god. But now, he had seen many pseudo-saint experts. In fact, he had even fought against a pseudo-sage expert and nearly killed him. Such a magnificent feat wasn't something an ordinary person could achieve. Nye Tian didn't linger. He left with Ming Jianyu and the others. Jun Aoqing and Nye Tian left together for the Nine Realms. There were too many things Jun Aoqing didn't want to mention in the land of the Forsaken. More importantly, she wasn't safe in the land of the Forsaken. 3 days later, in the God exclusion zone of the Nine Realms, 2 figures appeared in the sky above the demon ceiling mountain range. It was Nye Tian and Jun Aoqing. After leaving the land of the Forsaken, they first returned to the Nine Realms. They stayed there for a few days before returning to the Nine Realms. Nye Tian had many things on his mind. He didn't have much time, so he had to make full use of it. Nye Tian, is this the world you live in? Jun Aoqing looked around and sensed the aura in the space. She couldn't help but frown and ask. She could clearly sense that the aura in the space was much weaker than in the land of the Forsaken. It was even weaker than the Ninely Demon Realm. Yes. Nye Tian nodded and said with a faint smile, "Now you should know how amazing it is for me to have such strength in a world like this." "Are you saying that you're a genius?" Jun Aoqing smiled lightly, her eyes sparkling. After a few days, she had recovered a lot. Her girlish nature would show from time to time. "Am I not a genius?" Nye Tian asked and laughed. After going through the Nine Realms, the Jili Demon Realm, the Abandoned Land, and other different worlds, Nye Tian deeply felt the importance of the power system in every world. In terms of talent, the martial practitioners of the 9 major realms weren't inferior to the martial practitioners of the Ninely Demon Realm or the Forsaken Land. However, the overall strength of the martial practitioners of the 9 realms was much weaker than that of the other 2 realms. This was not a problem of a martial artist's talent, but the limitations of the world they lived in. The peak experts of the 9 major realms couldn't even reach the half-step saint realm, while the peak experts of the Abandoned Land were pseudo-saint realm experts who were infinitely close to becoming saint. The reason why there was such a gap was because of the difference in the power systems of the 2 worlds. If the top geniuses of the 9 major realms entered the Forsaken Land, they would also be able to reach the peak. Aoqing, let's enter the demon ceiling city first. Nye Tian smiled lightly and prepared to enter the demon ceiling city. He was worried about Cher and the 9 origins, so he wanted to inquire about some information in the demon ceiling city. The first thing that came to Nye Tian's mind when it came to inquiring about information was the inescapable net. An inescapable net that could penetrate every nook and cranny could obtain any information from there. However, at this moment, Jun Aoqing's expression suddenly changed, and she looked down at the mountain range below. "There's someone down there." QL11 Nye Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he sensed something, and his expression also changed. At the same time, in the mountain range below, an azure-robed figure was running wildly in the forest, with several wounds on his body, blood flowing wildly. Behind this figure were dozens of martial practitioners in black, madly chasing after him. Boom, boom, boom. Several attacks came crashing down, and the trees and rocks were directly shattered. Even the ground was torn open, creating deep ravines. These martial practitioners in black were all paramount god martial artists, and their joint attacks were powerful. "Damn it!" the azure-robed figure growled. Feeling the terrifying attacks coming, he turned around and punched out. Boom! There was a violent explosion in the air, and the azure-robed figure was directly sent flying, smashing through countless huge trees. "You can't escape, give up resisting." A cold and stern voice sounded, and a man in black rushed out, directly slashing down with his saber. The terrifying saber radiance surged for thousands of meters, heading straight for the azure-robed figure. The azure-robed martial artist had not yet stabilized himself, and he had no time to resist at all. His expression suddenly changed, revealing a look of horror. If this saber fell, the azure-robed martial artist would definitely end up dead. Boom! However, at this moment, in the void, a sword shadow fell from the sky and landed with a loud bang, like a giant that could support the heavens and the earth, directly smashing the saber shadow in the air into pieces. When the sword shadow landed, it was like a heavenly pillar, upside down on the ground, but it was still able to maintain its sword intent, and at the same time, it released an extremely fierce aura. What a strong sword intent! The dozens of martial practitioners in black were shocked by the sudden scene, and their expressions were filled with horror. The fear in their hearts was written on their faces. They had never imagined that a swordsman's sword intent could be so strong that it didn't dissipate, as if it were a giant, solid sword. This kind of incomparably shocking power stunned them, and they didn't dare to move forward. Scram! Then, a powerful voice rang out from the void like a clap of thunder, resounding in the ears of the martial practitioners in black. The martial practitioners in black looked up into the sky, and as far as their eyes could see, they saw two young faces. "How is this possible?" they cried out in shock. Never in a million years could they have imagined that the people in front of them would be so young. The people they saw were none other than Nye Tian and Jun Ouching. "I told you to scram, didn't you hear me?" Nye Tian's eyes flashed with killing intent as he spoke again, and a violent killing intent surged around him. It was extremely terrifying. The martial practitioners in black could sense the sharp killing intent, and their eyes were filled with shock. When they sensed Nye Tian's strength, they were completely dumbfounded. They couldn't believe that this young martial practitioner had the strength of a mid-stage paramount god. How was this possible? Nye Tian looked very young, but his actual age was definitely under 1,000 years old. In the 9 major realms, those who could step into the paramount god realm before the age of 10,000 were peak-level geniuses. Mid-stage paramount god realm martial practitioners under 1,000 years old were simply unheard of. However, these martial practitioners in black didn't seem to want to leave just like that. One of the martial practitioners in the lead mustered up 120% of his courage, stepped forward, looked at Nye Tian, and said in a loud voice, "We're from Ni Lin. This matter has nothing to do with you, sir. Please don't interfere." Ni Lin. When Nye Tian heard these 2 words, his lips curled into a cold, killing intent, and he said indifferently, "It's really a small world for enemies." Ni Lin was, of course, no stranger to Nye Tian. It was one of the 3 most mysterious organizations in the 9 major realms, and was as famous as the Inescapable Net and the Thousand Feathers Tower. More importantly, Nye Tian had almost died at the hands of those who possessed the reverse scale several times. Chapter 2341. Sensing that Nye Tian's killing intent had suddenly intensified, the black-clothed cultivator couldn't help but tremble, unable to hide the shock in his eyes. But he still kept his cool and said bravely, "I'm sure you're familiar with the name Ni Lin. Even if you're strong, you wouldn't want to provoke a powerful enemy. You talk too much." Nye Tian stared at the black-clothed man coldly, and the corner of his mouth twitched into a cold, murderous smile. "Sir, you're going to—" The black-clothed man froze for a moment, and then opened his mouth to speak. But before he could finish his sentence, he felt a cold sensation on his neck, and then blood sprayed out of his mouth, and his head flew into the air. The black-clothed cultivator didn't have time to react, and was instantly decapitated. "This!" The other black-clothed cultivators all gasped, their faces as pale as paper, and their bodies trembled. The black-clothed cultivator who had just died was an early-stage paramount god, and his battle prowess was terrifying. But in front of Nye Tian, he couldn't fight back at all. In fact, No one even saw when Nye Tian unleashed his sword intent. Run! The next moment, all the black-clothed cultivators came to their senses, and immediately turned to flee. I gave you a chance to leave, but you didn't cherish it. Now it's too late. Nye Tian stared at all the black-clothed cultivators, his eyes cold and murderous. Boom! 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 As soon as he finished speaking, the sword shadow on the ground trembled, and then split into dozens of sword shadows, whistling through the air. Dozens of black-clothed cultivators didn't have time to fight back, and were instantly crushed and killed. These dozens of people from Ni Lin were all early-stage paramount gods, and weren't weak at all. But unfortunately, their opponent was Nye Tian. Nye Tian was now a mid-stage paramount god, and had reached the level of a mid-stage paramount god. His battle prowess was even more terrifying than that of a peak paramount god. As far as he was concerned, early paramount gods were nothing more than trash. After killing all the black-clothed men, Nye Tian's figure flashed and landed beside the cultivator in green. Who are you? The cultivator in green asked in a quavering voice as he looked at Nye Tian with a horrified expression. Nye Tian looked at the person in front of him and frowned. Although this green-clothed martial artist was dressed in male attire, her voice, expression, and exquisite facial features clearly revealed that she was a woman. Nye Tian didn't say anything. He just took a step forward and prepared to treat the other party's injuries. What are you doing? Don't come over. The green-clothed girl was quite frightened and shouted loudly. Nye Tian laughed and said, "Little girl, do you think you have the ability to resist if I want to do something? You know I'm a woman?" The girl in green was stunned for a moment, her face full of surprise. "Don't move." Nye Tian didn't want to waste any time. He gathered the power of the earth vein source in his palm and sent it into the green-robed young lady's body. At that instant, Nye Tian suddenly sensed an unusually familiar aura from the young lady. The god-sealing fetus. In the next moment, his expression changed as he exclaimed in his heart. He didn't expect the girl's body to contain the aura of the god-sealing fetus. The green-clothed girl's expression improved after receiving the energy from the earth vein source. She couldn't help but ask when she saw Nye Tian's astonished expression, "What's wrong?" "Nye Tian, let's go." At this time, Jun Aoqing's figure arrived. She glanced at Nye Tian and seemed a little unhappy as she said indifferently, "Wait a minute." Nye Tian frowned as he fixed his gaze on the green-clothed girl and asked, "You're from the Nye clan? How did you know?" The green-clothed girl was startled and asked, "She's indeed from Nye Tian's clan." Nye Tian exclaimed in his heart as a smile appeared on his face. This girl had the god-sealing fetus, so she was obviously from the Nye clan. Nye Tian really didn't expect that his unintentional action would save someone from his own clan. "What's your name?" Nye Tian asked after some thought. "Nye Qingwan." Nye Qingwan hesitated for a moment, but finally said her name. "How old are you?" Nye Tian's eyes flashed with shock as he scanned Nye Qingwan's body with his divine sense. 21, Nye Qingwan said with a trembling voice, as if she was a little afraid of Nye Tian. 21 years old, peak lord-level strength. Nye Tian's eyes trembled with shock. He had already sensed that Nye Qingwan's strength was peak lord-level. A 21-year-old peak lord-level martial artist was a terrifying existence. Moreover, Nye Tian sensed that Nye Qingwan should be able to step into the paramount god realm very soon. This caused him to stiffen. In the past, Nye Tian's father, Nye Fenghua, was already a peak monster if he could step into the paramount god realm before the age of 10,000. What kind of monster was this girl in front of him? The word monster was no longer enough to describe such a person. She should be called a monster. Nye Tian couldn't imagine that the Nye clan had produced such a terrifying genius. Nye Qingwan's strength was peak lord level, but she was still able to hold on until now under the pursuit of dozens of paramount god martial artists. Her combat strength was definitely stronger than ordinary early-stage Paramount God martial artists. In the 9 major realms, it was unimaginable to reach such heights at such a young age. At this moment, Nie Tian became cold. He unfolded the holographic divine glyphs and carefully sensed Nie Qingwan's aura. He vaguely sensed a very strange aura on Nie Qingwan's body. This aura was incomparably holy, majestic, and very terrifying. Beginning light realm. At this moment, Fat Cat's voice suddenly sounded. She was so shocked that she almost screamed. This little girl has merged with the beginning light realm. Beginning light realm? Nie Tian was stunned and his expression froze. He didn't know what the beginning light realm was. Nie Tian, the power in this little girl's body is the light source, the beginning light realm. Fat Cat exclaimed again, extremely happy. Light source. When Nie Tian heard these words, his eyes suddenly trembled, and he almost screamed. So the beginning light realm was the light source. He never imagined that Nie Qingwan would actually fuse with the power of light source. The next moment, Nie Tian immediately thought of something. His eyes became extremely hot, and his heart was in turmoil. The light source, the Nie clan. My guess was right. Nie Qingwan was a member of the Nie clan, and her body had merged with the light source. This coincided with Nie Tian's previous guess. Li Guang Tongchen said that the Juying Palace had sent out the 9 great clans to search for the 9 great origins. Nie Tian guessed that the 9 great clans that Li Guang Tongchen mentioned were most likely the 9 great clans of the Genesis era. At this moment, he saw Nie Qingwan, who had the light source. This made him even more convinced that his guess was right. Chapter 2342. So that's how it is. So that's how it is. Nie Tian was extremely excited, and his eyes sparkled. The 9 great aristocratic families corresponded to the 9 great origins. Nie Tian was very sure of this. Moreover, he had already confirmed the relationship between several of the aristocratic families and the 9 great origins. The Qi Wu family corresponded to the dark origin, the Nie family corresponded to the light origin, the Xianyuan family corresponded to the wind origin, the Zhou family corresponded to the earth origin, and the Jian family corresponded to the fire origin. Among the 9 great origins, there was the thunder origin, water origin, wood origin, and metal origin. According to what Nie Tian knew, the other 9 aristocratic families included the Jiang family, Yu family, Guiwu family, and Nangong family. Without a doubt, the remaining 4 aristocratic families corresponded to the remaining 4 origins. The 9 great aristocratic families had created the prosperity of the 9 domains, but their purpose in coming to the 9 domains was to find the 9 great origins. Nie Tian's body had merged with the earth origin power, so he had been hunted by the Zhou family head. He had once asked his grandfather, Nie Dao, why the Zhou family valued the earth origin so much. Nie Dao clearly knew something, but he did not explain it to Nie Tian. He only said that there were some things that only the heads of the 9 aristocratic families were qualified to know. Nie Tian guessed that what Nie Dao was hiding was most likely the matter of finding the 9 great origins. After understanding everything, Nie Tian suppressed the shock in his heart and looked at Nie Qingwan with a frown. Nie Qingwan, why are you here? Nie Qingwan was a member of the Nie family. Her talent was abnormally monstrous, and her body had merged with the light origin power. One could guess that her status in the Nie family must be very high. Such a large aristocratic family like the Nie family would absolutely not allow a direct descendant to take risks alone. Nie Qingwan appeared here alone. She had almost died just now, and no one had helped her. Therefore, there were no powerhouses by her side to protect her. Nie Tian was very curious why Nie Qingwan would appear here alone. This is my own matter. Nie Qingwan was stunned for a moment and said, even if you saved me, I can't tell you everything. Nie Tian smiled faintly and glanced at Nie Qingwan. He guessed that this little girl most likely snuck out on her own. Otherwise, there would be no need for her to disguise herself as a man. Nie Tian, she is no longer in danger. Let's go. Jun Ouching, who was waiting impatiently at the side, said snappily. Your name is Nie Tian? Also surnamed Nie? Nie Qingwan was stunned for a moment and suddenly looked at Nie Tian. She seemed to understand something and said with a look of sudden realization, I know. You must be from the Wind and Cloud Alliance. You've been following me in secret, haven't you? Follow you. Nie Tian smiled speechlessly. He immediately knew what Nie Qingwan was thinking. Nie Qingwan must have thought of Nie Tian as someone who was secretly protecting her. It was a pity that Nie Tian was just passing by and took action in passing. Nie Tian, I'm warning you. Before Nie Tian could speak, Nie Qingwan's pretty face darkened and said, From now on, you are not allowed to follow me. Do you understand? With that, Nie Qingwan directly turned and left, completely ignoring Nie Tian's expression. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment. He looked at the direction where Nie Qingwan disappeared and couldn't help but feel a little worried. Although Nie Qingwan's strength was not considered weak, if she was alone, it would definitely be very dangerous. The reason why the Lin people would target her was most likely because of the light origin in her body. Moreover, Nie Tian was currently investigating the 9 great origins. Ouching, let's follow her. Thinking of this, Nie Tian nodded slightly and prepared to secretly follow her. Why do you want to follow her? Jun Ouching was obviously a little unhappy and asked with a sullen face. In fact, she was already a little unhappy when Nie Tian had spoken to Nie Qingwan. She is from my clan. If I'm not wrong, she should be considered my clan sister, Nie Tian said with a smile. She is your sister? Jun Ouching couldn't help but tremble when she heard Nie Tian's explanation. There was an unconcealable joy in her eyes. I think so. Nie Tian nodded. Although Nie Qingwan was from the Nie family, Nie Tian wasn't sure that this girl was of the same generation as him. Yes, we will follow her and secretly protect her. Jun Ouching nodded heavily and readily agreed. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment. He couldn't understand why Jun Ouching's attitude had changed so quickly. He didn't think too much and directly followed her. The two used Jun Ouching's space-time sword shadow to hide in the void and secretly followed Nie Qingwan. After leaving the Demon Ceiling Mountain Range, Nie Qingwan went directly to the Demon Ceiling City. The Demon Ceiling City was one of the 3 main cities in the God Zone. It had a lot of people. After entering the city, Nie Tian watched Nie Qingwan more cautiously. Nie Qingwan entered the city without any purpose. She just wandered around. Nie Tian and Jun Ouching followed closely behind Nie Qingwan, maintaining a distance of about 100 meters so that she wouldn't notice them. Nie Qingwan seemed to be tired of wandering and turned into an alley. Just then, Nie Tian suddenly sensed something and his eyes narrowed. Jun Ouching also sensed something and looked at Nie Tian. She transmitted her voice to ask, There are other people following us. Oh no. Nie Tian frowned and his expression suddenly changed. He sensed that dozens of powerful auras had appeared all around him, and they were secretly approaching him. Among them, there was an extremely powerful aura. It should be a peak paramount god expert. Take her away from here immediately. Nie Tian made a prompt decision. His figure flashed and appeared behind Nie Qingwan. Stalker, you finally showed yourself. Nie Qingwan laughed at this moment, but when she turned around and saw Nie Tian, she was surprised and said, How come it's you? It turned out that Nie Qingwan had already sensed someone was following them. She came to this alley to lure the stalker out. But to her surprise, the person behind her turned out to be Nie Tian. Follow me. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed. He wanted to take Nie Qingwan away. Can you leave? But before he could finish speaking, a low and murderous voice came from high up in the sky. Boom. Then, a strange invisible force fell from the sky and directly enveloped the space within tens of thousands of meters. Barrier. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment and immediately realized that the other party had set up a barrier in the space. The next moment, dozens of martial artists in black appeared in midair, staring coldly at Nie Tian and the others. Who are they? Nie Qingwan looked up at the men in black in midair, her little face full of horror. She had no idea what was going on. Damn it! Nie Tian ignored her. His face was gloomy and his eyes swept across the men in black. Then, his eyes locked on a demon-faced martial artist. His eyes narrowed and he said coldly, "It's you." Chapter 23:43. The Evil Soul Remnant. Nie Tian stared at the ghost-masked cultivator and uttered his name. He did not expect to meet an old rival here. The Evil Soul Remnant of the 13 Thorns of the Forbidden Scale. Nie Tian and the Evil Soul Remnant had fought a few times before. During the Evil Peak Sword competition, they had fought for a short time. Later on, they fought again. Although the Evil Soul Remnant had failed to kill Nie Tian twice, Nie Tian did not manage to kill it either. Nie Tian, I didn't expect to see you here. The Evil Soul Remnant smiled coldly and said in a deep voice, "What a pleasant surprise." It is a pleasant surprise, but whether you will be surprised or frightened is still up for debate. Nie Tianling smiled coldly, the corner of his lips curling into a cold, murderous intent. He was not afraid even if he was surrounded by dozens of Forbidden Scale assassins. Nie Tian, your strength has indeed improved tremendously, but you are now trapped in the adverse cold barrier. How much of your strength can you display? The Evil Soul Remnant grinned evilly, its eyes filled with malice. Nie Tian squinted his eyes and tried to circulate the Yuan meridians in his body. To his surprise, his Yuan meridians were being suppressed by the evil cold force and were not circulating smoothly. He could even feel that his blood flow had slowed down under the suppression of the evil cold energy. This adverse cold barrier was indeed powerful. It could even suppress the circulation of the sovereign dragon meridians. Attack! The Evil Soul Remnant did not wait any longer. It sneered and roared. Yes. The dozens of Forbidden Scale assassins responded in unison. They moved in unison and attacked Nie Tian. No. Nie Qingwan had never seen such a situation before. She screamed when she felt the overwhelming pressure. Nie Tian was not afraid at all. The sword aura around him surged and he slashed with his sword. The sword intent surged and a terrifying sword shadow rose into the sky. Kaboom! In the next moment, a terrifying collision occurred. Nie Tian's sword shadow was incomparably violent, and it instantly broke the joint attack of the dozens of Forbidden Scale assassins. Ah! In the void, there were heart-wrenching wails, and dozens of figures were directly sent flying. There were even weaker warriors whose bodies directly exploded under the impact of the sword intent, and blood splattered everywhere. With a single sword strike, Nie Tian had not only broken the joint attack of dozens of Forbidden Scale assassins, but had also severely injured them in the blink of an eye. How is this possible? The sudden turn of events stunned the Evil Soul Remnant, and an unconcealable fear appeared in its eyes. He had never expected Nie Tian's strength to have reached such an astonishing level. Dozens of Middle Paramount gods had joined forces, yet they couldn't even withstand a single sword strike from Nie Tian. Nie Tian was only a Middle Paramount god, and he was being suppressed by the defying cold aegis. How could his sword strike be so powerful? What do you think? Nie Tian laughed coldly, his attitude incomparably arrogant. The phantasm soul has been destroyed. Are you happy or terrified now? His 9 dragon veins were indeed suppressed by the inverse cold boundary, but he didn't use the power of the dragon veins at all. Instead, he used the power of the stars. The power of the stars could not be suppressed by any other power. Was there any power in the world powerful enough to suppress the main foundation of a saint's world? Nie Tian, how could you be so? The evil soul's eyes trembled, and it was too nervous to finish the word, powerful. Just a few months ago, Nie Tian's strength was about the same as his. But now Nie Tian's strength absolutely crushed his. But how was this possible? A few months' time was just a snap of a finger to deity realm martial artists. How could Nie Tian's strength increase so quickly? This completely overturned the evil soul remnant's understanding of martial arts. Nie Qingwan was also stunned. Nie Tian was so young, but his strength was too terrifying. He was even stronger than the elders of the Nie family. But how old was Nie Tian? How could he be so strong? Is there such a strong person in the Wind and Cloud Alliance? Nie Qingwan was puzzled. This was the first time she felt that someone was more monstrous than her. At this moment, a cold smile appeared on Nie Tian's face as he looked at the phantasm soul and the other man. It's your turn now. After one move, there were only two people left in the reverse scale. One was the evil soul remnant, and the other was a black-clothed and masked martial artist. The black-clothed martial artist's aura was even stronger than the evil soul remnant's. His strength was at the peak of deity realm. One could guess that this person's position in the reverse scale was not low. The reverse scale had sent out so many experts just for Nie Qingwan. They must have come for the light element origin. Brat, your insolence ends here. The black-clothed martial artist said coldly. Then, his figure moved. The atmosphere in the space suddenly became sinister and cold. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed. He immediately understood that the inverse cold boundary in the space was set up by the black-clothed martial artist. Go to hell. The black-clothed martial artist's aura rose to the extreme. He roared and slammed his palm down. The majestic palm energy shook the void and blasted towards Nie Tian. Nie Tian's eyes were as calm as still water. There was no fear in his eyes. His opponent was strong, but Nie Tian was not weak either. However, before Nie Tian could make his move, a cold and stern voice came from the sky. You're the one who should die. Boom. Almost at the moment when the murderous voice resounded, space suddenly shook, and then a sword shadow appeared like a ghost. Bang! The next moment, there was a muffled sound in the air. The black-clothed martial artist didn't have time to react. He didn't even have time to scream. He was sent flying and exploded into a pool of blood in the air. Nie Tian's expression flickered with astonishment as he saw this. What? The evil soul took a deep breath in, and its eyes were filled with terror. The mask on its face was shaking uncontrollably. He couldn't believe his eyes. His companion had died just like that. His death was swift and sudden. Surprisingly, the person who had attacked was not Nie Tian, but a young girl who seemed to be in her teens. Jun Aoqing's strength is so terrifying. Nie Tian stared at Jun Aoqing in shock. The person who had killed the black-clothed martial artist was none other than Jun Aoqing. Nie Tian had forgotten that Jun Aoqing had awakened the Hell Ghost Meridian, which was the legendary Khanate martial meridian. Furthermore, Jun Aoqing was a late-stage paramount god, and had reached the pinnacle of sword and martial arts. Even the current Nie Tian wasn't sure if he could defeat Jun Aoqing. The death of the black-clothed martial artist caused the defying cold barrier to shatter. Looking at the phantasm soul, the corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched as he smiled coldly. Do you think you'll be able to escape this time? Previously, the evil soul remnant had managed to escape from Nie Tian on several occasions. But this time, he wouldn't be so lucky. The evil soul remnant's eyes flickered and he froze. He won't be able to escape. However, he won't die by your hands. Instead, he will die by my hand. However, at that moment, an eerie voice rang out in the sky. QL11 Nie Tian's expression flickered, and he looked up into the sky. A very familiar figure appeared in his line of sight. Lian Jiufeng. When Nie Tian saw Lian Jiufeng's face, he couldn't help but gasp. Lian Jiufeng. Chapter 2344. Nie Tian looked at Lian Jiufeng and frowned. His expression was ugly. Lian Jiufeng was a very difficult person to deal with. Every time he appeared, Nothing good would come out of it. To Nie Tian, he was an unwelcome guest. Promise. Nie Tian's eyes focused when he heard Lai Yinjiufeng's words and asked. At this moment, he had an ominous feeling in his heart. Lai Yinjiufeng had gone to the Jili demon realm to obtain the 3 Lives Blood Jade. The 3 Lives Blood Jade was used to help Lai Yinjiufeng and Share awaken their memories. However, Lai Yinjiufeng had wanted to steal the 3 Lives Blood Jade. In the end, he and Nie Tian had each obtained half of the 3 Lives Blood Jade. Did Lai Yinjiufeng come for the other half of the 3 Lives Blood Jade? Have you forgotten? Lai Yinjiufeng stared at Nie Tian strangely before letting out a laugh. If that's the case, allow me to remind you of something. When you first came to the 9 realms, you were in a hurry to find the boundary of the first demonic fire universe. You obtained information about the boundary of the universe from the net above and earth. You agreed to Elder Dugulingtian's 3 conditions. Now, do you remember? Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly before he smiled and said, So that's what you're talking about. Lai Yinjiufeng had not come for the 3 Lives Blood Jade. He had come for something else. Back then, Nie Tian had agreed to the net above and Earth's 3 conditions to obtain information about the boundary of the universe. Of the 3 conditions, he had completed 2, but he had not completed the 3rd. The 3rd condition of the net above and Earth was for Wind and Cloud Alliance to release 1 person. 7 kills. 7 kills had challenged Nie Fenghua and was imprisoned by Wind and Cloud Alliance after losing. The net above and Earth wanted to use Nie Tian to get Wind and Cloud Alliance to release 7 kills. The first time Nie Tian heard the name 7 kills, he felt a strong murderous intent. This person was definitely a violent and bloodthirsty person. However, a long time had passed, so he had forgotten about it. Nie Tian, a promise is a promise. Lai Yinjiufeng smiled faintly when he saw that Nie Tian had remembered. He said, You won't go back on your word, will you? You don't have to provoke me. Since I've agreed to it, how could I go back on my word? Nie Tian faintly smiled. The corner of his lips curled into a cold smile as he said, I'm very curious. Just who is 7 kills? Why does the nets of heaven and earth value him so much? Since the inescapable net had asked Lai Yinjiufeng to handle Qi Sha's matter personally, it was enough to prove that Qi Sha held an extraordinary significance to the inescapable net. It's none of your business who 7 kills is. Lai Yinjiufeng smiled faintly and said, All you need to do is have Wind and Cloud Alliance release 7 kills. With your identity and position, I don't think the Wind and Cloud Alliance master will reject your request. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. Although he still maintained a calm expression, he was quite shocked in his heart. At that moment, he suddenly thought of something, and he had a guess about 7 kills' true identity. However, he wasn't sure, so he didn't want to say it now. Didn't you want to kill Phantasm Remnant, Lai Yinjiufeng? After a moment of pondering, Nie Tian laid his eyes on the Phantasm Soul and said with a faint smile, Let's do it. He could sense that Lai Yinjiufeng was a late-stage paramount god. It seemed that after obtaining the 3 Lives Blood Jade, Lai Yinjiufeng's memories were slowly awakening, and his strength was increasing by leaps and bounds. Nie Tian was very curious to know just how strong Lai Yinjiufeng was. Phantasm Remnant was a good opponent, and he could use it to test out Lai Yinjiufeng's strength. Humph! Lai Yinjiufeng sneered and looked at Phantasm Remnant with disdain. He's too weak. He's not worth my time. How arrogant! Do you really think you can kill me? Phantasm Remnant sneered, and a black vortex appeared next to him. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed when he saw this. He wasn't unfamiliar with this scene at all. The black vortex was none other than the spacetime vortex created by Devil's Knight's Eye. Last time, Phantasm Remnant had used this method to escape. Farewell, Phantasm Remnant said with a sinister smile, then took a step forward and entered the black vortex. But in the next moment, a strange scene occurred. Phantasm Remnant entered the vortex, but he didn't vanish. The black vortex seemed to be locked down by some terrifying power. Such strong sword intent. Nie Tion's eyebrows furrowed in astonishment. He could tell that someone was using sword intent to lock down the spacetime vortex and prevent Phantasm Remnant from escaping. You think you can pull off something like that in front of me? Lai Yin Jiufeng sneered, his lips curling into a cold, murderous smile. Swoosh! Just at the instant his laughter fell, a piercingly cold sword shadow flashed in the air. Phantasm Remnant didn't even have time to react before it was devoured by the sword shadow. The sudden scene caused Nie Tion to gasp. Only now did he realize that a terrifying expert was hiding beside Lai Yin Jiufeng. QL11. It was very likely that this person was an expert close to peak God realm. Let's go, Nie Tion. Lai Yin Jiufeng smiled faintly and prepared to leave. Leave. However, right at this moment, an ice-cold voice sounded out. Did I agree? Lai Yin Jiufeng's expression abruptly darkened. Then, he turned around and looked at the person who had spoken. He laughed and said, Nie Tion, your luck with women is pretty good. It seems like every woman by your side is extraordinary. Nie Tion frowned and looked at Jun Aoqing. The person who had spoken just now was none other than Jun Aoqing. Jun Aoqing was extremely angry right now. She didn't want to see Nie Tion threatened by anyone. You're courting death, Jun Aoqing shouted. She suddenly moved and vanished into thin air. Not good. Lai Yin Jiufeng immediately sensed that something was wrong. His expression changed, and he cried out. He clearly hadn't expected Jun Aoqing to be far stronger than he had expected. Boom! Without any hesitation, Lai Yin Jiufeng's body shook, and the terrifying power of golden flames surged out of his body. It enveloped him like a shield of fire. Boom! In the next moment, a sword shadow suddenly appeared in the air. It was extremely strange. It seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. Bang! Then, there was a dull sound and Lai Yin Jiufeng was sent flying. He left a bloody trail in the air. Jun Aoqing was a space-time martial practitioner. Her sword intent was so powerful that it could cut through space and time around her. Therefore, her attack was extremely strange, unpredictable, and unpredictable. Die! A clear and harsh voice rang out while Lai Yin Jiufeng was still in the air. Jun Aoqing's figure was like a ghost, flashing away. Chapter 2345. Not only did Jun Aoqing not stop after heavily injuring Lai Yin Jiufeng, she even wanted to kill him directly. Jun Aoqing, don't kill him. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. Nie Tion suddenly reacted and screamed. Is not equal to Nie Tion had fought Lai Yin Jiufeng many times before, so he naturally knew that the latter was not a kind person. However, Lai Yin Jiufeng's identity was special, so he could not die just yet. More importantly, if Jun Aoqing killed Lai Yin Jiufeng, it would completely enrage the inescapable net. At that time, the inescapable net would chase after Jun Aoqing at all costs. The consequences of that would be very serious. Even if the Emperor of Hell had not revived yet, the inescapable net had peak God realm experts like Tion Chief and D Chief. In the air, Jun Aoqing swung her sword down. The sword was sharp and gave off a terrifying aura of spacetime. It seemed like it could tear through anything. In that moment, Lai Yin Jiufeng felt the most realistic killing intent. His eyes trembled, and his shock was written all over his face. He never thought that Jun Aoqing would be so terrifying. There was no doubt that Lai Yin Jiufeng would die the moment the sword landed. Boom! But when the fatal sword was less than 10 meters away from Lai Yin Jiufeng, it suddenly trembled and disappeared. Jun Aoqing's figure froze in the air. She looked at Lai Yin Jiufeng with cold disdain and said indifferently, "You're so weak. I really don't know where you get the courage to be so arrogant." His indifferent voice was filled with a strong sense of mockery. Lai Yin Jiufeng was covered in blood, and his eyes were still in shock. He looked at Jun Aoqing with undisguisable wariness. It could be said that this was the most dangerous moment he had encountered since his rebirth. Even when he had fought against Nie Tian many times, he had never been in such a sorry state. Jun Aoqing had almost killed him with 2 easy strikes. If Nie Tian hadn't shouted in time, Lai Yanjiufeng would have been a corpse by now. Nie Tian heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that Jun Aoqing had stopped in time. If Lai Yanjiufeng really died, there was no telling what the consequences would be. She's so scary. Nie Qingwan looked up at Jun Aoqing. Her eyes were trembling, and her face was stiff. At this moment, she finally understood that Nie Tian was not the only one who was more talented than her. There was also Jun Aoqing. She even felt that Nie Tian might not be as good as Jun Aoqing. At this moment, Nie Tian's expression was not only relaxed, but also shocked. Jun Aoqing was too terrifying. She had killed Ni Lin's expert with a single strike. At this moment, Lai Yanjiufeng had nearly lost his life. Nie Tian didn't think he could reach such a level of battle prowess. More importantly, Jun Aoqing's spacetime sword intent was too terrifying. It could tear through space to attack an opponent. No one could dodge it. Thank goodness Lai Yanjiufeng is not dead, Nie Tian thought to himself as he looked at Lai Yanjiufeng. But in the next moment, he suddenly felt the killing intent in Lai Yanjiufeng's eyes. His expression changed. Kill! Lai Yanjiufeng's eyes turned cold at almost the same time. Jun Aoqing's expression changed slightly when she heard Lai Yanjiufeng's voice. Whoosh! At this moment, a sharp sword shadow appeared in the air. It was filled with killing intent and pressed down on Jun Aoqing. The sudden scene caused Nie Tian's eyes to shake. Then, he shot into the sky. He never thought that Lai Yanjiufeng would not stop and wanted to kill Jun Aoqing. The one who attacked was the expert hiding beside Lai Yanjiufeng. Jun Aoqing's reaction was very fast. Her long sword swept out, a sword shadow whistled out like a stormy sea, stirring up the void and making it tremble. In midair, the 2 sword shadows collided with each other. The space suddenly shook, and a terrifying sword wave spread out in all directions. The hidden expert was very strong. He was clearly stronger than Jun Aoqing. Boom! The surging sword intent spread and pressed down on Jun Aoqing. Jun Aoqing's expression changed abruptly. She could not suppress the fear in her eyes. In a situation like this, the space around her was filled with terrifying sword intent. She could not avoid the wave of sword energy. She was very strong, but her martial body was very weak. In fact, she was weaker than other martial practitioners of the same level. If she was hit by such a terrifying wave of sword energy, she would be heavily injured even if she did not die. Boom! In this moment of danger, Jun Aoqing suddenly felt a vast power appear. It enveloped her and formed a white barrier around her. Bang! In the next moment, the wave of sword energy hit the white barrier. Jun Aoqing was sent flying, but she was caught by a figure in the air. Jun Aoqing, are you all right? Nie Tian steadied himself and asked nervously. He was the one who used the light yang heavenly armor to protect Jun Aoqing. QL 11-inch, I'm fine. A trace of blood flowed from the corner of Jun Aoqing's mouth. Her face was slightly pale, but her aura was steady. She was not heavily injured. She looked at Lai Yanjiufeng coldly. She did not think that Lai Yanjiufeng would want to kill her after she showed mercy. Lai Yanjiufeng, what are you doing? Nie Tian abruptly looked up and stared at Lai Yanjiufeng. He roared angrily. Shouldn't I kill someone who is a threat to me? Lai Yanjiufeng wiped away the blood on his body and stared coldly at Jun Aoqing. I won't allow you to kill her, Nie Tianling said coldly. His eyes were extremely dark. If Lai Yanjiufeng still wanted to kill Jun Aoqing, then he was forcing him to turn against him. Humph. Suddenly, Lai Yanjiufeng laughed and said, I can give you face and let her live for a few more days. The figure hiding in the air instantly disappeared when he finished speaking. Nie Tian's tense nerves finally relaxed. His rationality told him that this was not the time to completely break off his relationship with Lai Yin Jiufeng. Jun Aoqing's eyes were cold. She looked a little embarrassed. "Nie Tian, see you at the Wind Cloud Alliance in 3 days," Lai Yin Jiufeng said cold after recovering a little. He left immediately after saying this. Nie Tian looked in the direction Lai Yin Jiufeng left in and couldn't help but look worried. It looked like he really was going to the Wind Cloud Alliance this time. Lai Yin Jiufeng had come for 7 kills, and Nie Tian had already guessed 7 kills' true identity. 7 kills had challenged Nie Fenghua and was imprisoned by the Wind Cloud Alliance after losing. The fact that the inescapable net wanted to save 7 kills meant that he was very important to the inescapable net. The inescapable net's true goal was to revive the Netherworld Emperor. Lai Yin Jiufeng had obtained the 3 lives blood jade, but he still hadn't revived the Netherworld Emperor. Instead, he had come to save 7 kills. This meant that 7 kills was indispensable to the revival of the Netherworld Emperor. Back in the Jili Demon Realm, the Wood Spirit King Mu Xiangshan had told Nie Tian that the heaven-punishing demon heart's 3 incarnations must be gathered in order to revive the Netherworld Emperor. Now, the good share and the evil Lai Yin Jiufeng had appeared. There was still the slaughter body that had yet to appear. It was definitely no coincidence that Lai Yin Jiufeng had come to save 7 kills at this time. Chapter 2346. 7 kills is the killing form. Nie Tian's eyes flickered as he confirmed his guess. The killing form was the strongest among the 3 transformations of the heaven-punishing demon heart. From its name, it could be determined that this killing form was an extremely bloodthirsty and terrifying character. Fortunately, 7 kills was defeated by Nie Fenghua and imprisoned in the Wind and Cloud Alliance. Otherwise, no one knew what kind of bloodshed this person would have caused in the 9 realms. Looks like I have to go to the Wind and Cloud Alliance. Nie Tian smiled bitterly. A beautiful face appeared in his mind. Mo Rushi. Rushi, it's been a long time. How are you? Thinking of Mo Rushi, Nie Tian couldn't help but smile. He had been separated from Mo Rushi for years. He wondered how she was doing. He also wondered if he could see Mo Rushi in the Wind and Cloud Alliance. Let's go, Nie Tian landed and glanced at Jun Aoqing and Nie Qingwan. Where are we going? Nie Qingwan was stunned and asked. The Wind and Cloud Alliance, Nie Tian said. The Wind and Cloud Alliance. Nie Qingwan screamed. I'm not going. I've finally escaped. I don't want to go back. Little girl, it's not up to you whether you want to return to the Wind and Cloud Alliance. Nie Tian laughed and looked at Nie Qingwan with an unfriendly gaze. What do you want? Nie Qingwan thought Nie Tian wanted to do something. She was so scared that she was trembling. I'm sending you to a fun place. Nie Tian laughed. 9 extremes appeared in his hand and a space-time light appeared. With a thought, the sword intent around him surged and pushed Nie Qingwan into the 9 extremes. Before Nie Qingwan could figure out what was going on, she was already in an unfamiliar place. Little girl, there is a Pai Xiu and a golden hoe accompanying you inside, so you won't be too lonely. Nie Tian smiled faintly and put Juji away. He then looked at Jun Aoqing and said, Let's go. Jun Aoqing did not ask much, but silently followed behind Nie Tian. The Wind and Cloud Alliance was located in 9 Heavens City, which was also the God-forbidding region. However, it was tens of thousands of miles away from the Demon Sealing City where Nie Tian was. According to Lai Yin Jiufeng's promise, they would meet at the Wind and Cloud Alliance in 3 days. 3 days was enough for Nie Tian to hurry on with his journey. He didn't want to complicate matters, so he prepared to fly on his own. Nie Tian and Jun Aoqing traveled very fast. A distance of tens of thousands of miles was nothing to them. 2.5 days later, the two appeared at the outskirts of the 9 Heavens mountain range. 9 Heavens City is just past the 9 Heavens mountain range. Nie Tian looked at the 9 Heavens mountain range and smiled faintly. Your sister is still in Juji. Do you want to let her out? Jun Aoqing suddenly thought of Nie Qingwan and couldn't help but laugh. That girl is too noisy. Let her stay inside. Nie Tian smiled faintly. He had no intention of letting Nie Qingwan out. That's fine. Jun Aoqing smiled. She actually didn't want Nie Qingwan to come out either. She liked having Nie Tian by her side. The two didn't say anything else. Their figures flashed, and they directly entered the Nine Heavens mountain range. The two of them were like two sword shadows, speeding through the forest. About an hour later, the two arrived at the other end of the Nine Heavens mountain range. They would soon pass through the entire mountain range. Through the dense forest, Nie Tian could even see the tall city walls of Nine Heavens City. Seeing that Nine Heavens City was already in sight, Nie Tian couldn't help but speed up. However, at this moment, his expression suddenly changed. Watch out! Jun Aoqing's voice rang out. Boom! 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 Almost at the same time as her voice rang out, 3 sharp arrows appeared in the void, whistling through the air. Nie Tian's eyes focused on the 3 sharp arrows in the air. The sharp arrows' aura was extremely majestic, as though they were tearing through the void. A layer of purple lightning surged around the huge arrows, surging violently. QL11 judging from their aura, such terrifying sharp arrows could directly kill a late-stage Paramount God expert. Extreme Yang Sky Armor, activate! The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched slightly. Light flashed around him, and the Extreme Yang Sky Armor was activated, enveloping him and Jun Aoqing. Boom! Boom! In the next moment, the 3 sharp arrows fell, but they couldn't penetrate the Extreme Yang Sky Armor and directly shattered. Given Nie Tian's current strength, even an ordinary peak Paramount God expert wouldn't be able to penetrate his Extreme Yang Sky Armor. Although the 3 sharp arrows were terrifying, they posed no threat to him. However, the fact that he was being used as a target for no reason infuriated Nie Tian. Who's there? Show yourself! He roared, sending his divine sense out to scan the area within 10,000 meters. There was nothing there. Clearly, the person who had shot the arrows had hidden himself. Frowning, Nie Tian couldn't help but be more cautious. He didn't know who his opponent was, so he didn't dare to act rashly. Roar! Right at this moment, an angry roar that sounded like that of a wild beast suddenly rang out in the distance. Then, a violent aura appeared and directly attacked Nie Tian. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed as he saw the forest in front of him being destroyed by a wild force. Everything in the area was reduced to ashes. What a powerful lightning-type aura! He thought. His eyes narrowed and his heart filled with shock. He had already sensed that the person who had attacked him was a lightning-type martial artist. However, he hadn't expected the opponent's lightning-type power to be so strong. Judging from the aura alone, Nie Tian had never seen such a terrifying lightning-type aura before. Even his lightning sword intent didn't have this kind of thunderous aura. Boom! In the next moment, a bolt of purple lightning appeared and condensed into the figure of a giant wolf in the air, pouncing toward Nie Tian. Wherever the purple lightning giant wolf passed, the surrounding area was swept by the lightning and turned to ashes. Even the boulders were turned to dust. Nie Tian. Jun Aoqing's expression changed when she sensed the purple lightning giant wolf's ferocious aura, and she called out nervously. I'm here. You'll be fine. Immediately afterwards, he raised his arm and exerted a tremendous amount of force into his palm. The ground in front of him was actually lifted into the air by his palm strike. Destruction Earth Seal, open! His lips twitched slightly, and the ground in front of him rose up, as if a mountain had been erected on the ground, protecting them like a shield. Rumble! In the next instant, the purple lightning giant wolf was like a boulder descending from the sky, landing on the ground. Instantly, the ground was shattered into pieces, and a huge wave was formed. At that instant, Nie Tian pushed his palm forward and pushed the wave away. Following which, he slashed down with his sword, and wherever the sword's shadow landed, the purple thunder giant wolf crumbled. One could not help but admit that the purple lightning giant wolf was extremely terrifying. Luckily, Nietion's reaction was quick enough. Otherwise, he would have suffered serious injuries when the purple lightning giant wolf got close to him. He could sense that the purple lightning giant wolf was extremely violent. Even his martial body was unable to withstand it. Among the 9 elemental powers, the lightning-type power was known as the strongest attack. Chapter 23:47. Nietion steadied himself and lifted his head to look ahead. Although he had expanded his divine sense to the maximum, extending tens of thousands of meters away, he still could not sense the enemy's aura. The person who had attacked him had been hiding in the dark, preventing Nietion from discovering him. Nietion, be careful. At this moment, Little Fat Cat's voice rang out. It was slightly nervous as it said, "If I'm not mistaken, that purple lightning should be the source of lightning, purple thunder 9 howls." Upon hearing Little Fat Cat's words, Nietion's eyes widened in shock. He had not expected to encounter the legendary thunder origin energy, purple thunder 9 roars, when he had just arrived at the 9 Heavens mountain. No wonder he felt that the thunder aura was so terrifying. It was the thunder origin energy. His thunderbolt sword essence was also the thunder origin energy. However, compared to the purple thunder 9 roars, it was much weaker. Nietion, Jun Aoqing seemed to have noticed something and sent a voice transmission to Nietion. Nietion's eyes narrowed, but his expression did not change much. He knew that Jun Aoqing's divine sense was above his. She must have discovered the enemy's hiding place. Roar. However, before Jun Aoqing could speak again, a violent roar was heard from afar. It sounded like a dragon's roar. Boom. In the next instant, an even more terrifying bolt of purple lightning surged forward like a purple ocean, roaring and roaring. Nietion's eyes darkened when he felt the aura of the purple thunder. The aura of this bolt of purple lightning was several times stronger than the one from before. This time, if Nietion continued to defend passively, he would be at a great disadvantage. Sword Sealing Formation, World-Devouring Sword Dragon. In an instant, Nietion reacted. He let out a low roar and a terrifying sword essence gushed out of his body. At the same time, his blood chi surged and his aura soared to the extreme. This was an unavoidable attack. He had to face it head-on. Boom. But at this moment, the bolt of purple lightning struck. It shook violently in the air and condensed into a giant purple lightning dragon. Crack, crack, crack. The purple thunder dragon's body was thousands of meters long, and the purple thunder power around it exploded like thunder. It seemed that even the sky and earth were going to be torn apart. The violent scene caused Jun Aoqing's pretty face to freeze slightly. Even her space-time sword intent could not withstand such a terrifying aura. However, Nietion was not afraid in the slightest. He released the Godfiend power in his body, and the Godfiend's sword intent appeared once more. Starlight heavenly slash slashed out. Roar! The sword will fused with the terrifying power of the sword sealing forbidden array and condensed into a sword dragon that was thousands of meters long. It roared loudly and shook the sky. Boom! Boom! In the void there were 2 giant dragons. One was condensed from the power of purple lightning, while the other was condensed from the fiend god sword intent. Both of them possessed boundlessly violent energy. Boom! In the next instant, the 2 enormous dragons collided with one another, causing the space to tremble and the heavens and earth to fall silent. The 2 enormous dragons were too powerful. Neither of them could swallow the other in an instant. They could only wrestle with each other and hit each other bit by bit. Chi chi chi. There were ear-piercing sounds in the sky. Streaks of crazy energy were wreaking havoc in the sky. It was extremely terrifying. The purple lightning and the black sword intent surged out. The surrounding space was chaotic, as if it was the end of the heavens and earth. Nietion's figure quickly retreated, and he stared at the sky, not daring to relax for even a moment. He had thought that the other party was just a nobody, but now it seemed that the other party's strength was no weaker than his. Boom! At this moment, the two enormous dragons finally could not hold on any longer. They exploded at the same time, and endless violent energy surged out, shaking the heavens and earth. The violent energy in the void dissipated after a long time, and the space became calm again, as if nothing had happened. A trace of blood flowed out from the corner of Nietion's mouth. He looked forward, but still could not feel anything. Nietion in front. At this moment, Jun Aoqing's voice suddenly sounded, reminding Nietion. Nietion snapped out of his daze and slashed out with his sword without so much as a glance at it. The 1,000-meter-long sword's shadow was like a raging dragon, roaring and rolling. Bang! In the void there was a muffled sound, and then a figure in black appeared in the void. A pair of evil eyes stared at Nietion. Nietion looked at the martial artist in black, and his eyes slightly narrowed. He did not know this person, but the latter looked at him with a playful expression. "Who are you?" Nietion frowned and asked coldly. "You don't deserve to know my name." The martial artist in black sneered, and his attitude was extremely arrogant. Are you stronger than me?" Nietionling laughed and said indifferently, "In my opinion, you're just a shameless person who ambushes others. Kid, your strength has indeed exceeded my expectations, but you won't be so lucky the next time we meet." The martial artist in black smiled coldly, and then his figure moved, and he left. Nietion did not stop him, but his frown deepened. From the martial artist's words, it seemed that he had been waiting for Nietion. Not many people knew that Nietion had come to Wind and Cloud Alliance. In order not to alert others, he had come on his own. How did this martial artist know that Nietion was coming? Lian Jiufeng. Then, a name appeared in Nietion's mind, and his expression darkened. Lian Jiufeng was the only one who knew that he was coming to Wind and Cloud Alliance. Then the person in front of him must have been ordered by Lian Jiufeng. This person had thunder origin energy, so he was definitely from one of the 9 great families. However, Nietion was not sure which family he was from. Lian Jiufeng really had some skill. He could even mobilize people from the 9 great families. However, Nietion felt that the martial artist might not have come for him, but for Jun Aoqing. Just now, he clearly felt that the person this black-clothed martial artist wanted to kill was not him, but Jun Aoqing. It seemed that Lian Jiufeng still held a grudge that he had almost died at the hands of Jun Aoqing, and wanted to kill Jun Aoqing. Lian Jiufeng must have felt threatened by Jun Aoqing. That was why he was in such a hurry to get rid of her. QL11. Unfortunately, the martial artist he had sent wasn't very strong. He had no intention of killing Jun Aoqing. Right now, what interested Nietion the most was not the relationship between the martial artist and Lian Jiufeng, but the purple thunder 9 roars within the martial artist's body. One had to admit that the power of the purple thunder 9 roars was terrifying. If Nietion was any weaker, he would have died at the hands of the martial artist in black a long time ago. The black-garbed man was only a late paramount god, and the only reason he had the battle prowess of a peak paramount god was because of the violet lightning 9 howls. Nietion, this guy didn't even use the true power of the 9 roars of purple thunder. Otherwise, you would have been a corpse long ago. Little Fat Cat's voice rang out as it chuckled. Nietion was stunned. His expression froze. Chapter 23:48. Nietion stood rooted to the spot and only reacted after a long while. He had returned to the 9 realms this time to find out about the 9 origins. In just a few days, he had met people with light origin and lightning origin. It seemed like he was quite lucky. Faintly, he had a feeling that he would encounter even more cultivators with origin energy. Nietion, are you hurt? Jun Aoqing asked nervously when she saw the blood at the corner of Nietion's mouth. QL11. I'm fine. Nietion smiled faintly and wiped the blood at the corner of his mouth. He was only slightly injured and would be fine soon. Then, the two wasted no time and left the Nine Heavens mountain range, heading towards Nine Heavens City. After a while, Nye Tian and Jun Aoqing appeared on the streets of Nine Heavens City. After Nye Tian asked about the Wind and Cloud Alliance's location, he headed there directly. Nine Heavens City was crowded. Nye Tian and Jun Aoqing took a whole hour to cross half of the city. At this moment, an extremely wide plaza appeared before them. At the entrance were 3 towering stone pillars with 3 words carved on them: Wind and Cloud Alliance. Nye Tian looked around and found it strange that there was not a single person in the huge plaza. He walked towards the plaza without hesitation. The two quickly arrived at the end of the plaza and a narrow passageway appeared before them. "Who's there?" Before they stepped into the passageway, they heard a deep, angry roar. Then, 2 cultivators in green descended from the sky and appeared before Nye Tian and Jun Aoqing. Nye Tian's eyes flickered when he glanced at the two. The 2 cultivators were not powerful. They were only peek-over gods. However, they were clearly just ordinary guards. Ordinary guards were already peek-over gods. It was enough to show how powerful the Wind and Cloud Alliance was. "Brothers, my name is Nye Tian. I'm a disciple of the Nye family. I have something to discuss with the Wind and Cloud Alliance Master," Nye Tian said politely after thinking for a moment. The 2 guards glanced at Nye Tian and Jun Aoqing with a strange gaze, and then burst into laughter. 2 kids who are still wet behind the ears, asking to see the Alliance Master the moment they open their mouth. "Who do you think you are? Hurry up and scram. This is the territory of the Wind and Cloud Alliance. It's not a place where you can mess around. If you anger me, I'll kill you with a single palm strike." The 2 guards were very arrogant. They only saw that Nye Tian and Jun Aoqing were very young, but they did not know their strength. Sure enough, being polite is the best way to improve the Wind and Rain Alliance. Nye Tian smiled bitterly. The 2 guards were stunned at the same time. They looked at Nye Tian and said, "Kid, I think you're tired of living." Nye Tian laughed and did not say anything else. Instead, he shook his body and 2 sword intents surged out. They turned into a sword intent cage and enveloped the 2 guards. Ah! The sudden scene caused the 2 guards to turn pale in fright. They screamed at the same time. "I'll have to trouble you too. After I leave, the sword intent cage will break by itself." Nye Tian smiled faintly and stepped into the tunnel before him. Jun Aoqing smiled and followed. The 2 guards turned pale and did not dare to move. They could feel how terrifying the sword intent was. If they resisted, they would lose their lives. They did not expect the strength of these 2 kids to be so terrifying. As Nye Tian walked through the tunnel, a majestic palace appeared in front of him. It looked like a giant that had weathered through the elements, but still stood tall. But at that moment dozens of martial artists appeared in the sky. They stared coldly at Nye Tian. Nye Tian looked up into the sky and swept his gaze across everyone present as he muttered, "That's more like it." The guards were all paramount gods, and there were even a few mid-paramount gods among them. As one of the top forces in the 9 major realms, it was not strange for the Wind and Rain Alliance to have paramount god guards. But in Nye Tian's eyes they were too weak. "Who are you?" one of the guards asked coldly. He stared at Nye Tian and Jun Aoqing with killing intent. "Don't be nervous. We're not enemies." Nye Tian smiled faintly and tried to be polite. However, the guards didn't fall for that. Instead, they unleashed their energy and sent it rumbling toward Nye Tian. Nye Tian shook his head and smiled, speechless. Given his current level of strength, he wasn't even afraid of peak experts from the 9 major realms. Why would he be afraid of a bunch of early-stage or mid-stage paramount gods? Rumble! His body shook slightly, and he directly shook off the pressure in the air. The dozens of guards were actually forced to retreat. How impudent! Right at this moment, a vigorous roar rang out, following which, a figure dashed out and slammed his palm down towards Nye Tian. The boundless force of the palm pressed down on Nietian. Nietian's eyes narrowed, and he summoned his astral power to form an astral shield to protect himself and Jun Ouching. Boom! Immediately after, the terrifying shadow of the palm landed. The ground shook violently, and a huge crack appeared on it. However, Nietian's astral shield wasn't damaged in the slightest. In fact, it didn't even have a crack on it. "Stay your hand," Nietian growled, glaring at the attacker. These people were simply too violent. They didn't even give him a chance to explain himself. "You must die for trespassing in the Wind Cloud Alliance." However, the attacker completely ignored Nietian's words. His energy surged as he unleashed an even more terrifying palm strike. Nietian frowned and couldn't help but want to make a move. However, before he could, Jun Ouching said in a cold voice, "You're courting death." Blurring into motion, she blurred into motion. "Jun Ouching, don't hurt him!" Nietian was shocked and quickly shouted. He knew exactly how strong Jun Ouching was. Even Blaze Jiufeng had almost died at her hands. In front of Jun Ouching, these guards couldn't fight back at all. Jun Ouching appeared in front of them in an instant. She stabbed out with her sword, and her sword will swept through the air like an invisible hand. In the next moment, something strange happened. The space around them seemed to have frozen. The figures of the guards were like wooden statues, frozen in midair, unable to move at all. This. Nietian's mouth fell open, but he couldn't say anything. It was too strange. It was as if dozens of paramount gods had been nailed in the air. "This little girl's sword will has gotten stronger again." Just then, Little Fat Cat's voice rang out, filled with shock. How could he not see what Jun Ouching was doing? She was using her sword will to freeze space. As for the dozens of guards, they were all trapped in the frozen space. Fat Cat didn't expect Jun Ouching's spacetime sword will to be this terrifying. She could freeze space with a casual swing of her sword. Who dares to behave so atrociously in the Wind and Cloud Alliance? At this moment, a thunderous roar resounded in the void. A gray-robed elder appeared in the sky, his eyes locked onto Jun Ouching. "What a powerful aura!" Nietian reacted. He looked at the gray-robed elder and sensed the latter's aura. He was shocked. Chapter 2349. Nietian stared at the gray-robed elder and narrowed his eyes. Is not equal to judging from his aura, the elder's battle strength should be close to the peak of the godly state. Nietian guessed that the elder's position in the Wind and Cloud Alliance was not low. Jun Ouching steadied herself and looked at the gray-robed elder cold. She did not speak, nor did she attack. She was waiting for Nietian's reply. "Senior, I am Nietian from the Nie clan. I have come to the Wind and Cloud Alliance to seek an audience with the Alliance leader." Nietian looked at the gray-robed elder indifferently and said respectfully, "I did not mean to offend the Wind and Cloud Alliance. Please forgive me if I have offended you." The person before him should be a high-ranking member of the Wind and Cloud Alliance. Judging from his age, he should be of the same generation as Nietian's grandfather, Nie Dao. It was not wrong for Nietian to call him senior. "I don't care who you are." However, the gray-robed elder's expression was cold. He said coldly, "There's only one outcome for provoking the Wind and Cloud Alliance, death." Nietian went blank for a moment and couldn't help but frown. He did not expect the other party to react in such a manner after apologizing politely. Admittedly, it was wrong of him to barge into the Wind and Cloud Alliance. However, he did not attack the people from the Wind and Cloud Alliance. He only defended himself. Even Jun Ouching only controlled the guards and did not hurt them at all. The gray-robed elder saw all this. How could he not know Nietian's intention? If Nietian was really here to provoke the Wind and Cloud Alliance, the guards before him would have been long dead. The gray-robed elder's way of doing things was too domineering. "Storm guards!" At this moment, the gray-robed elder suddenly roared. The surrounding space shook and 9 black-robed martial artists appeared. They stood in midair and stared coldly at Nye Tian and Jun Ouching. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed as he scanned the 9 storm royal guards with his divine sense. His expression changed slightly. All 9 of them were late paramount gods, and their auras were very similar. Clearly, they were all of the same type. Judging from the positions of these 9 people, they were clearly cooperating with each other, and there was a faint aura of a formation around them. Kill! The gray-clothed old man looked at Nye Tian with a gaze that suddenly emanated an icy cold, killing intent. He roared furiously and actually gave the order to kill. The 9 storm Imperial Guardians moved in unison, moving back and forth in the air. Suddenly, the entire space was filled with a vast and boundless power of the formation. Nye Tian, you have to be careful. These 9 people are all wind attribute martial artists. Each of them will be the core of a formation and will form a formation. Fat Cat's voice rang out to warn Nye Tian. When 9 of them work together, they're even more terrifying than an ordinary peak paramount god. Nye Tian nodded slightly, then looked over at Jun Ouching, who immediately flew over to his side. Wind surge, kill them! In the next moment, the 9 storm royal guards shouted in unison, unleashing their most powerful energy. 9 gales of wind, combined with the power of the spell formation, were like 9 wild dragons that shot toward Nye Tian and Jun Ouching. Nye Tian frowned slightly as he sensed the energy coming from above. The combined power of these 9 storm royal guards was truly terrifying. They were powerful enough to kill an ordinary peak paramount god in the blink of an eye. However, to Nye Tian, the 9 of them didn't pose much of a threat at all. That said, the dozens of guards in the area were in grave danger. Even if they were only hit by the wind, they would either be seriously injured or killed. The storm royal guards were like madmen. In order to kill Nye Tian, they didn't even care about their own people. Howling, Nye Tian shot up into the air and slashed out with his sword. This was none other than his most powerful move, the sagely heaven-defying swordplay, mansword severing stars. Rumble! The sword intent was piercingly cold, and the image of the sword was like a dragon as it shot up into the air, causing the surrounding space to tremble. At the same time, Nye Tian hovered in midair, radiating the power of the stars, which transformed into an astral soul shield that spread out to protect the dozens of guards. Rumble! In the next moment, the terrifying forces collided with each other. That sword shadow was extremely terrifying. The power of the sword intent bloomed, and the destructive power surged out, directly breaking through the 9 gales. The 9 storm royal guards were struck by the sword intent, and were sent flying backward. Bang! On the other side, the frozen space shattered under the impact of the sword intent. The dozens of guards were protected by the astral soul shield, and thus weren't injured. They immediately retreated to safety. What? The gray-robed old man's eyes widened. Clearly, he hadn't expected Nye Tian to be so strong, which was far beyond his expectations. But Nye Tian was clearly only a mid-paramount god. How could he possibly defeat the combined attack of 9 storm royal guards with a single sword strike? The gray-robed old man's gaze on Nye Tian grew even colder, filled with killing intent. Nye Tian's expression darkened when he sensed the killing intent. He didn't understand why the gray-robed old man would want to kill him so badly. After all, he hadn't done anything since coming to the Windcloud Alliance. He might have trespassed, but he hadn't provoked them. Didn't his actions just now prove everything? He had even protected the dozens of guards himself. Wasn't that enough to prove his goodwill? More importantly, he hadn't used his full strength in that attack. If he had, the 9 storm royal guards would have been gravely injured, if not dead. The 9 storm royal guards hovered in the air. Although they weren't injured, they were deeply shaken. They looked at Nye Tian with fear and trepidation. How could they have ever imagined that this young cultivator would have such shocking battle prowess? Brat, how dare you attack in the Windcloud Alliance? You're courting death. At this moment, the gray-robed old man let out a low roar. His figure flashed into the air, and his eyes locked onto Nye Tian with killing intent. Nye Tian looked at the gray-robed old man, his expression grim. The fact that the gray-robed old man had ordered the Storm Royal Guards to attack him was already very strange. But now he wanted to do it himself. That was even stranger. Moreover, his killing intent towards Nye Tian was very strong. His eyes were filled with the desire to kill him. Nye Tian thought that his actions had already made his intentions clear, but the gray-robed old man insisted on killing him. This made him very suspicious. He was curious as to where the gray-robed old man's killing intent was coming from. At this moment, even the guards were looking at the gray-robed old man in confusion. Clearly, they couldn't understand his actions. Nye Tian didn't kill him, and he even saved him. Clearly, he wasn't the one who provoked them. However, the guards didn't say anything because the gray-robed old man had a high status. He was one of the 2 deputy alliance leaders of the Windcloud Alliance, Ren Quanchen. QL11. Everyone in the Windcloud Alliance knew that Ren Quanchen was narrow-minded, cruel, and bloodthirsty. Anyone who doubted him in front of him would be courting death. Ren Quanchen seemed to have made up his mind to kill Nye Tian. Chapter 2350. Do you really want to kill me? Nye Tianling stared coldly at Ren Quanchen from the sky and spoke in a deep voice. At this moment, he was already suspicious of his opponent's motives. However, since his opponent was from the Wind and Cloud Alliance, he had to be cautious. Brat, you will die for provoking the Wind and Cloud Alliance. Ren Quanchen replied coldly. His body shook and his aura surged. Boundless energy surged and filled the space within a few thousand meters. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed. He could immediately tell that Ren Quanchen was a wood attribute martial artist. Among the 9 elements of heaven and earth, the wood attribute was one of the weaker ones. As a wood attribute martial artist, it was not easy for Ren Quanchen to possess such strength. Brat, die. In the next instant, Ren Quanchen roared in a low voice and struck out with his palm. Immediately afterwards, the wild power in the air converged and morphed into a giant, withered tree hand that was thousands of meters long. Blotting out the sky and covering the earth, it descended towards Nye Tian. Nye Tian frowned and his expression changed slightly. However, his lips curled into a faint smile. Ren Quanchen's strength was indeed above Nye Tian's. However, his wood attribute was his greatest weakness. Starfire Ocean Incinerator. Nye Tian's lips curled into a smile and he struck out with his Starfire Heavenly Slash. A sword shadow appeared and it looked like a fire dragon. The sword shadow was burning with blazing flames. So powerful! The guards and Imperial Guards exclaimed when they saw the scene before them. Nye Tian's sword intent was extremely sharp. Most importantly, it contained the power of the fire attribute. This was extremely terrifying. Among the 5 elements, the fire attribute was the bane of the wood attribute. Moreover, Nye Tian's sword intent was not of the fire attribute. The crowd was curious. What attribute was Nye Tian a martial artist? Little did they know that Nye Tian had a star raw stone in his body. The power of the star raw stone could be transformed into any type of power. The power of fire was currently Nye Tian's strongest attribute. This was because his body had merged with the dual supreme fires. Boom! Under countless horrified gazes, the giant withered tree hand and the flaming sword shadow collided. With a loud boom in the air, the flaming sword shadow actually pierced through the giant withered tree hand. Ren Quanchen's gaze suddenly tightened. This was something that he had never expected. His reaction was very fast. He raised his hand abruptly, and a surging wild force appeared, blocking the sword shadow that was coming straight at him. However, his body was forced to take a few steps back. He was in a rather sorry state. At the same time, Nye Tian was hit by the violent force in the air and was forced to take a few steps back before stabilizing his body. After all, Ren Quanchen was a powerhouse who was close to the apex. Even though his attributes were suppressed, he was still able to fight evenly with Nie Tian. You want to kill me, but it's a pity that you don't have the strength to do so. Nie Tian looked at Ren Quanchen, raised his eyebrows, and said provocatively. Nie Tian was very satisfied that he was able to fight against such an expert. After all, the difference in strength between him and Ren Quanchen was too great. If it wasn't for the fact that their attributes were suppressed, he would have been severely injured in the exchange just now. The guards of the Wind and Cloud Alliance gasped in shock at the scene in front of them. Their mouths were wide open, but no words came out. They had never thought that Nie Tian would not be at a disadvantage when fighting against Ren Quanchen head-on. Ren Quanchen was the Deputy Alliance leader of the Wind and Cloud Alliance. Not just in the Wind and Cloud Alliance, but even in the 9 major realms, he was a powerful expert. As for Nie Tian, he was obviously a young martial artist. Based on the age of a godly state martial artist, Nie Tian was still at the stage where he was still wet behind the ears. To be able to fight against Ren Quanchen head-on at such a young age was too terrifying. It was hard to imagine how terrifying Nie Tian would be when he grew up. Ren Quanchen looked at Nie Tian with a gloomy look in his eyes. His wrinkled face was as red as it could be. With his status and strength, it was indeed embarrassing that he couldn't even kill a junior when he attacked with all his might. Nie Tian, you forced me to do this. Ren Quanchen's eyes suddenly turned cold, and he roared in his heart. He had directly called out Nie Tian's name. It was obvious that he already knew about Nie Tian. Nie Tian clearly saw the change in Ren Quanchen's expression. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly, and he thought to himself, "You old man, there's something fishy about you." Just now, he could tell that Ren Quanchen's actions were strange and ruthless. It was obvious that he wanted to kill him. And now, the change in Ren Quanchen's gaze made him even more certain of this. He didn't know who Ren Quanchen was, but he was sure that this person's identity was not as simple as it seemed on the surface. There must be another identity behind this person. Fusang Fishin. At this moment, Ren Quanchen's lips curled into a cold smile, and he roared in a low voice. Boom! Immediately after, his body continuously released violent wood elemental power. Following this, a strange scene took place. Streams of violent energy surged out from Ren Quanchen's body like tentacles, and tore his body apart. His body instantly expanded, like a giant tree soaring into the sky, spreading across the sky. Seeing this, Nie Tian could not help but frown. The transformation of Ren Quanchen's body was similar to his previous dragonization. The only difference was that Nie Tian's dragonization was dragon transformation, while Ren Quanchen had turned into a giant Fusang ancient tree. The others were astounded upon seeing this. Who would have thought that, in order to kill Nie Tian, Ren Quanchen would actually use his trump card? In the blink of an eye, Ren Quanchen's body had turned into a 3,000-meter-tall Fusang ancient tree. The giant tree stood tall in the sky, and its giant branches were like tentacles, waving in the air and emitting a violent aura, as if the heavens and earth were trembling. Feeling the aura of the Fusang ancient tree, Nie Tian couldn't help but change his expression. It seemed that after Ren Quanchen transformed into the giant tree, there was an additional aura. It was an aura of the light attribute. Boom! While Nie Tian was puzzled, the Fusang ancient tree suddenly shook, and then emitted a dazzling golden light. It was like a scorching sun illuminating the space within hundreds of thousands of meters. Even the ground was covered with a layer of golden halo. Nie Tian frowned, and he was quite surprised. QL11 at this moment, he was very sure that Ren Quanchen did contain the aura of 2 attributes at the same time. One was the wood attribute and the other was the light attribute. It seemed that Ren Quanchen was much stronger than he had imagined. Moreover, the aura released by the Fusang ancient tree was several times stronger than Ren Quanchen's aura before. In this case, even if Nie Tian used the chaotic flame, He might not be able to resist the attack of the Fusang ancient tree. Boy, be obedient and die. At this moment, the Fusang ancient tree shook, and the golden light became even more dazzling. On the giant trunk, a blurry human face appeared, and it spoke in a deep voice. It was Ren Quanshan's voice. Whoosh! The next moment, the Fusang ancient tree suddenly moved, and endless power surged out. The light in the space was dazzling. Chapter 23:51. In the sky, Nie Tian squinted his eyes and tensed up. Kill! The Fuso giant tree let out another furious roar. Then, the entire tree suddenly moved like a wild beast. In midair, the countless branches of the Fuso tree gathered together and formed a terrifying arm. With a loud rumble, it smashed down towards Nie Tian with great force. Bang! In an instant, the heavens and earth trembled. A blinding light poured down like a waterfall, accompanied by a violent force. Nie Tian, be careful! June Ouching, who was watching from below, couldn't help but cry out, her face pale with fright. She was not sure if Nie Tian could block Ren Quanshan's attack. Nie Tian stood in the sky with the 9 dragon veins in his body circulating rapidly. Dragon Chi surged behind him, and a crimson ocean of lightning appeared. He could not retreat. He could only fight with his life on the line. However, at this moment, he suddenly sensed something. His expression changed, and his eyes were filled with joy. Ren Quanshan, stop! In the next moment, a furious roar could be heard in the sky. Following this, a golden ray appeared and turned into a golden shield, covering Nie Tian. Bang! Ren Quanshan's punch landed on the golden shield around Nie Tian, shattering it into pieces. The Fuso tree was knocked back a few hundred meters by the powerful impact. The tree trembled violently, as if it could not stand straight. In the next moment, a mountain-like figure descended and stood between Nie Tian and Ren Quanshan. Alliance leader. The sudden scene caused everyone to abruptly raise their heads. Their faces were filled with shock as they looked at the mountain-like figure, and they cried out in unison. Grandfather! Nie Tian's lips curled up as he looked at the familiar face before him. The person who appeared was none other than Nie Tian's grandfather, the alliance leader of the Wind and Cloud Alliance, Nie Dao. Ren Quanshan's figure shuddered in the air before he stabilized himself and returned to his human form. He looked at Nie Dao, bowed slightly, and called out, Alliance Master. Ren Quanshan, what are you doing? Nie Dao's face was dark and cold. Clearly, he was furious. Alliance Master, this person trespassed into the Wind and Cloud Alliance and injured the Wind and Cloud Imperial Guard. I had no choice but to act against him. Ren Quanshan's eyes flickered as he spoke in a deep voice. What a good excuse. Nie Tianling laughed but did not say anything else. He's from the Nie clan. Nie Dao forcefully suppressed the anger in his heart and said coldly. This subordinate does not know, Ren Quanshan replied respectfully. Nie Dao glanced at Ren Quanshan and did not say anything else. Nie Tian looked at Ren Quanshan and smiled. He thought to himself, Ren Quanshan, I'm afraid you know what kind of person I am. Otherwise, you wouldn't have spared no effort to kill me. It's just a misunderstanding. Everyone can leave. Nie Dao did not want to pursue the matter any further. All the guards retreated in an instant. Lord Alliance Master, this subordinate will take his leave as well. Ren Quanshan said and left. Nie Tian, let's go to the Wind and Cloud Palace first. Nie Dao looked at Nie Tian and scanned him with his divine sense. He could not hide the joy in his eyes. After a few years, Nie Tian's improvement was truly shocking. Nie Tian nodded slightly and followed Nie Dao to the Wind and Cloud Palace with June Ouching. After a while, the three arrived outside the Wind and Cloud Palace. Nie Tian, wait here for a moment. I still have something to take care of. Before entering the Wind and Cloud Palace, Nie Dao suddenly stopped and signaled Nie Tian to wait outside the palace. Okay. Nie Tian nodded and stopped outside the palace. At this moment, two figures walked out from the Wind and Cloud Palace. Seeing the two figures, Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and his expression changed. One of the two figures was a middle-aged man, while the other was a young man. The middle-aged man's aura was extremely vigorous. It was not much weaker than Nie Dao's. However, Nie Tian's gaze was fixed on the young man's figure. It's him. Nie Tian's expression sank as he sensed the young man's aura. The young man's face was unfamiliar, but his aura was extremely familiar. His entire body was emitting an extremely violent purple lightning aura. Nie Tian was certain that this man was the one who had ambushed him at the Nine Heavens mountain range not long ago. This guy's body had merged with the origin force of lightning, the purple thunder nine roars. It's him indeed. At the same time, Fat Cat exclaimed in surprise. Jun Aoqing's expression changed too. Her eyes were filled with great hostility. Nie Tian, Fat Cat, and Jun Aoqing were extremely perceptive. They were certain that the young man before them was the one who had ambushed them. Nie Tian did not expect to meet this guy in the Wind and Cloud Alliance. I didn't expect us to meet again so soon. It seems like fate has brought us together. At that moment, the young man spoke with a calm smile. Nie Tian, you two know each other? Nie Dao asked after being stunned for a moment. Yes. Nie Tian smiled and looked at the young man. I've met him once at the Nine Heavens mountain range, not long ago. Nie Dao noticed something amiss with Nie Tian's gaze. He chuckled and said, So you and Nangong Lin already know each other? Not really. Nie Tian nodded and said, I just found out that his name is Nangong Lin. I also just found out that your name is Nie Tian. Nangong Lin's lips twitched as he responded. Nie Tian chuckled, but didn't say anything. He knew that Nangong Lin had ambushed him at the Nine Heavens mountain range. Therefore, Nangong Lin already knew his identity. Grandpa, this is... Nie Tian didn't expose Nangong Lin. Instead, he smiled faintly and looked at the middle-aged man. He had already guessed that the middle-aged man was from the Nangong family, and his status was not low. This is the Nangong family's master, Lord Nangong Duo. Nie Dao glanced at Nangong Wua and introduced him. Oh, it's the Nangong family's master. My apologies. Nie Tian smiled and said politely. He did not expect the middle-aged man to have such a high status. He was the Nangong family's master. The Nangong family had two super experts. One was the Nangong family's master, Nangong Duo, and the other was the Holy Parliament's vice president, Nangong Dushio. Nie Tian had seen Nangong Dushio several times and even fought with her. It was his first time seeing Nangong Duo. Judging from his aura, Nangong Duo's strength should be similar to Nangong Dushio's. As for Nangong Lin's identity, Nie Tian guessed that he should be Nangong Duo's son. QL11 he was right. Nangong Lin was indeed Nangong Duo's son. Chapter 23:52. Nangong Duo glanced at Nie Tian. He didn't say anything, but a strange light flickered in his eyes, as if he understood something. 8, however, he didn't pay too much attention to Nie Tian. Instead, he looked at Nie Dao and said, Patriarch Nie, we can't delay the marriage any longer. We have to abide by the agreement made by our ancestors. Patriarch Nangong, you don't need to remind me. I know what to do, Nie Dao replied coldly. As long as you know, Nangong Duo said with a cold smile, then left. Nangong Ling looked at Nie Tian and smiled. We'll meet again, Nie Tian. Nie Tian smiled faintly, but didn't say anything. The Nangong father and son left the Windcloud Grand Hall and disappeared into the sky. Nie Dao frowned as he looked in the direction where the two of them had disappeared. His expression was ugly. Are you all right, Grandpa? Nie Tian asked, frowning when he sensed Nie Dao's disappointment. I'm fine. Let's talk in the Grand Hall. Nie Dao forced a smile and walked into the Windcloud Grand Hall. The three of them entered the hall and took their seats. Nie Tian, who is this young lady? Nie Dao's gaze swept over Jun Aoqing, and he could not help but laugh as he asked. She's my friend, June Ouching. Nie Tian smiled faintly, but didn't introduce her in detail. Nie Dao smiled faintly, then sent his divine sense into June Ouching. Instantly, his aged face stiffened. After a full 10 seconds, Nie Dao finally reacted. His expression softened a bit, and his voice trembled as he said, She's actually a late paramount god. Yeah, Nie Tian said, nodding calmly. It was normal for Nie Dao to be so shocked by June Ouching's strength. After all, according to the martial Dao of the Nine Realms, June Ouching shouldn't even exist. Even Nie Tian was a freakishly talented genius. Nie Dao was already shocked by Nie Tian's increase in strength. Now that he knew June Ouching's strength, he was even more shocked. He didn't expect that there was someone more monstrous than Nie Tian in this world. After a while, Nie Dao calmed down and let out a long sigh. Nie Tian, you've suffered a lot these past few years. He knew that the reason why Nie Tian was able to increase his strength so quickly was not only because of his extraordinary talent, but also because of his extraordinary willpower. He dared to do what others did not dare to do. Most of the martial artists in this world relied on cultivation to increase their strength. However, there was an extremely small number of people who relied on continuous training to improve their strength. Nie Tian was one of these people, and he was the one who had the most successful in his training. To be able to get to where he was today, the life and death struggles that Nie Tian had experienced were not something that ordinary people could imagine. I'm fine. Nie Tian smiled faintly. Then, he thought of something and asked, Grandfather, why did the Nangong father and son come to find you? I heard Patriarch Nangong mention a marriage alliance. What does that mean? Sigh. Nie Dao sighed after hearing Nie Tian's question. His expression became solemn as he said, Nie Tian, there are some things that I can't tell you yet. I can only tell you that Nangong Dudu and I came here for Nangong Lin's marriage. Nie Tian's gaze sharpened as he frowned. Is the Nangong family planning a marriage alliance with the Nie family? He knew that the Nangong family should be biased towards the Holy Parliament. After all, Nangong Dushio was the vice president of the Holy Parliament. Meanwhile, the Wind and Cloud Alliance and the Holy Parliament were on opposing side. Therefore, the marriage alliance between the Nangong family and the Nie family was very strange. Yes. Nie Dao nodded and said, Nangong Lin is engaged to a girl from the Nie family. The Nangong father and son came today for this matter. Grandfather, is this a difficult matter? Nie Tian asked after seeing Nie Dao's frown. Nie Dao sighed again and said, The girl who is engaged to Nangong Lin ran away from the marriage. She disappeared half a month ago. I sent many people to look for her, but they couldn't find her. Ran away from the marriage? Nie Tian's gaze sharpened as he suddenly thought of something. His eyes trembled as he asked, Grandfather, is the girl who ran away from the marriage called Nie Qingwan? How did you know? Nie Dao's eyes trembled as he shouted in surprise. He looked at Nie Tian in disbelief. The girl who ran away from the marriage was called Nie Qingwan. But the strange thing was, how did Nie Tian know about Nie Qingwan? Nie Tian looked at Nie Dao and couldn't help but shake his head with a bitter smile. He said, Grandfather, a few days ago, I met Nie Qingwan in the Demon Ceiling City. Huh! Nie Dao was stunned. He stood up excitedly and said, Then where is she now? Stay by my side, Nie Tian said and took out the 9 extremities. With a thought, he released Nie Qingwan. Nie Tian, you bastard! Nie Qingwan cursed as soon as she came out. But when she steadied herself, she suddenly saw a familiar old face and froze. Little Wan. Nie Dao looked at Nie Qingwan and his old face sank. Tears seemed to flow out of his eyes. Gee Grandpa. Nie Qingwan looked at Nie Dao in a daze. It took a long time for her to react. Her little face instantly turned pale and looked very embarrassed. Nie Tian looked at Nie Qingwan and confirmed the latter's identity. It seemed that Nie Qingwan was indeed Nie Tian's clan sister. Moreover, she was his cousin. In the next moment, Nie Qingwan immediately reacted. She turned around and ran. Nie Qingwan, stop right there! Nie Dao suddenly roared. His voice was like a clap of thunder, echoing throughout the hall. Nie Qingwan's figure froze. Her legs felt as if they were filled with lead sand. She could no longer move. Grandfather! She immediately turned around. Her eyes were already filled with tears. She bit her lips and said, I will not marry Nangong Lin. Every word was spoken in a very resolute manner. QL11 Nie Dao's old face darkened. He froze on the spot, unable to speak. Seeing this, Nie Tian couldn't help but frown. He looked at Nie Dao and said, Grandfather, since Qingwan doesn't want to marry, why do you have to force her? Even if Nangong Lin and Qingwan are engaged, we can just break the engagement. With the Wind and Cloud Alliance's strength, do you think the Nangong family would dare to attack us? The Wind and Cloud Alliance's strength far surpassed the Nangong family. Even if they broke the engagement, there should be no problem. However, Nie Dao looked very solemn. This made Nie Tian very confused. Nie Tian, things aren't as simple as you think. Nie Dao let out a long sigh. He seemed to have aged a lot in an instant. Nie Tian's face was full of confusion. He asked, Grandfather, what are you worried about? Nie Dao froze on the spot. After thinking for a long time, he finally said, the engagement between Nangong Lin and Qingwan was decided by the Nie family's ancestors. Even if I am the Nie family's patriarch, I can't change it. Huh! Nie Tian's gaze froze. He couldn't help but be stunned. The Nie family's ancestors should be people from hundreds of thousands of years ago or even earlier, and Nie Qingwan was only in her 20s. How could the Nie family's ancestors decide Nie Qingwan's marriage? Nie Dao's words made Nie Tian even more confused. Grandfather, what is going on? Nie Tian couldn't help but ask out of curiosity. Chapter 23:53. In the Great Hall, Nie Tian looked at Nie Dao with shining eyes, waiting for the latter to tell him everything. Nie Tian, you once asked me why the Zhou family head was after you. Nie Dao's expression was solemn as he stared at Nie Tian. I didn't tell you the truth at the time. Now I've decided to tell you the truth. Nie Tian nodded and listened attentively. The Zhou family head is after you because you have Earth origin energy in your body. Nie Dao nodded and said solemnly. People from the Zhou clan are looking for the essence of Earth. Nie Tian's eyes flickered with eagerness. Yes. Nie Dao nodded and said, searching for Earth origin energy is the destiny of the Zhou family. Nie Tian couldn't suppress the excitement in his eyes. He knew that his guess was correct. The 9 great clans had been sent by the Juying Shrine to search for the 9 origin energies in the 9 domains. Nie Tian, are you alright? Nie Dao asked after noticing that something was wrong with Nie Tian's expression. I'm fine. Nie Tian suppressed the shock in his heart and said, Grandfather, please continue. He wanted to personally verify this matter from Nie Dao's mouth. Nie Dao frowned, but he continued, in truth, the 9 great clans weren't from the 9 domains. They came from another world. The ancestors of the 9 great clans came to the 9 domains with their own missions. The Zhou family's mission was to search for Earth origin energy, while the Nie family's mission was to search for light origin energy. The members of the 9 great clans could only return to their original worlds after completing their missions. At this point, Nie Dao couldn't help but smile bitterly. It's a pity that even though the 9 great clans have been in the 9 realms for a very long time, they still haven't found the 9 great origin powers. Eyes trembling, Nie Tian rose to his feet and asked in a trembling voice, Grandpa, is the world where the 9 great clans used to live called the Land of the Abandoned? Nie Dao's expression changed when he heard Nie Tian mention the Forsaken Land. He froze for a few seconds before asking, You know about the Forsaken Land? And Nie Tian nodded heavily, unable to suppress the joy on his face. Suppressing the excitement in his heart, he briefly recounted what he had experienced in the Forsaken Land. After hearing Nie Tian's words, Nie Dao's entire body froze like a wooden statue, unable to react for a long time. He had never imagined that Nie Tian had actually been to the Forsaken Land and had even returned safely from there. He finally knew why Nie Tian's strength had improved so quickly. It turned out that he had been to the Forsaken Land. He finally understood why Jun Aoqing's strength was so terrifying. It was because she was from the Forsaken Land. Nie Tian had just returned from the Forsaken Land, which was something Nie Dao had never expected. After a long while, Nie Dao finally calmed down a little. He looked at Nie Tian with blazing eyes and asked, "What kind of organization is the Vanishing Shadow Temple?" As the patriarch of the Nie family, he knew some secret. He knew about the Nie family's mission and the existence of the Forsaken Land. But this was the first time he had heard of the Vanishing Shadow Temple. He was very curious as to how terrifying this organization that had sent out the 9 great families was. "I don't know either." Nie Tian shook his head with a bitter smile. "I don't know much about the Vanishing Shadow Temple." Nie Dao was taken aback for a moment, then asked, "If the Vanishing Shadow Temple is so powerful, why didn't they come looking for the 9 great sources themselves? Why did they send the ancestors of the 9 great families?" "I don't know." Nie Tian also shook his head. This was also what he was puzzled about. He had seen the power of Shadow Moon Greedy Wolf and Ing Qinyu with his own eyes. If such experts came to the 9 great domains, they would absolutely crush everything. If the Vanishing Shadow Temple was so powerful, why didn't they search for the 9 great sources themselves? Why did they send the 9 great families? Perhaps the Vanishing Shadow Temple had some sort of restriction that prevented them from leaving the abandoned land. To the current Nie Tian, the Vanishing Shadow Temple was a complete mystery. There was not much point in thinking about the Vanishing Shadow Temple now. But Nie Tian really wanted to know why the Vanishing Shadow Temple wanted the 9 great sources. Qingwan has already merged with the beginning light realm. Our Nie family has already found the light origin power, right? Nie Tian said as he glanced at Nie Qingwan. No. Nie Dao shook his head with a bitter smile. The light origin power in Qingwan's body is only a part of the beginning light realm. Furthermore, this portion of light origin was brought out by our ancestor from the Forsaken Land to search for the rest of the light origin. There is a strong connection between the origin energies. For hundreds of thousands of years, the Nie family has been constantly searching for light origin. However, it will be very difficult to find the light element essence. Someone must first fuse with the light element essence, and then form a connection with the other related essences. Qingwan is the second person to successfully fuse with the light origin other than Lord Ancestor. But the strange thing is that after she merged with the light origin, she did not sense the existence of other light origins. So even now, the Nie family has not been able to find light origin. Nie Dao couldn't help but sigh. So that's how it is. Nie Tian nodded slightly. He roughly understood everything. When the Vanishing Shadow Temple had asked the ancestors of the 9 great families to search for the 9 great sources, they must have each given them a small portion of origin power so that they could search for other origins. As far as Nie Tian knew, the darkness origin, the darkness abyss, and the earth origin, the veins of the earth, were scattered and not complete. So it was not surprising that the light origin in Nie Qingwan's body was only a small portion. It seemed like it wouldn't be easy to find the complete 9 great origins. Then Nie Tian became much colder. "Grandfather, what does the Nie family's mission have to do with Qingwan's engagement?" The ancestors of the Nie family and the Nangong family had an agreement. Nie Dao bitterly smiled and said, "If the Nie and Nangong clans both have people who can fuse with origin power, then the 2 of them must be together." Also, the agreement between the 2 ancestors emphasized that as long as someone who can merge with origins appears in the 2 families, regardless of their age or gender, they must be together. This. Nie Tian was stunned, a strange expression on his face. The agreement between the two ancestors was too strange. Not only did age not matter, but did they have to be together even if they were of the same gender? Thinking of this, Nie Tian couldn't help but feel a chill down his spine. He was even a little glad that Nangong Ling and Nie Qingwan were a man and a woman. If they were of the same gender, it would be very awkward. Isn't this agreement a little too forceful? Nie Tian turned to look at Nie Qingwan and couldn't help but frown. Nie Dao sighed, his expression ugly. This is the agreement between the two ancestors. Even I cannot change it. Nie Tian frowned, not knowing what to say. Chapter 23:54. Nie Tian was startled when he heard the fat cat's voice. He asked, "Fat, did you discover something?" The fat cat acted as if he hadn't heard Nie Tian's words. He had a strange expression on his face, and his deep blue eyes emitted a strange glow, as if he was very excited. Nie Tian felt even more strange when he saw the fat cat's reaction. However, he didn't disturb the fat cat and waited patiently. I know that must be the case. After a while, the fat cat let out a strange cry, with a rippling smile on his face, as if he had discovered something important. Fat, what do you know? Nie Tian couldn't help but ask again. I know why the two ancestors had such a strange agreement. The fat cat chuckled proudly. Why? Nie Tian frowned and his eyes burned with passion. He couldn't understand why the ancestors of the Nie clan and the Nangong clan would have such a strange agreement. If two clans appeared at the same time, they would have to fuse with each other. It would be fine if the two clans were of the opposite sex, but what about the same sex? The two ancestors wanted to fuse the two origin forces together. The fat cat's lips curled into a strange smile as he said. Nie Tian was stunned when he heard the fat cat's words. He was stunned for a long time, unable to understand what the latter meant. Is it hard to understand? The fat cat chuckled when he saw Nie Tian standing there in a daze. Nie Tian's expression was one of shock. Finally, he came to his senses and asked, Little fatty, are you saying that different kinds of origin power can be fused to form new powers? He tried to explain his understanding, but his face was full of disbelief. He couldn't understand how two origin forces could be fused together. The 9 primordial energies of heaven and earth were forces with different attributes. It was because of their different attributes that they were independent and formed different forms of energy. On the other hand, the origin force was an existence that utilized the attributes of the 9 primordial energies to the extreme. If the two origin forces could fuse, what kind of scene would that be? What kind of attribute would the newly formed energy be, and would it form a new attribute? This was what Nie Tian couldn't understand. Moreover, he knew that the surrounding space was filled with the power of the 9 elements. If the 9 elements could all fuse with each other, if so, why didn't the 9 primordial energies merge? I'm just saying that the origin forces can fuse with each other. Little Fat Cat chuckled and said, As for whether or not it will become a new power, I don't know. Nie Tian was flabbergasted, and couldn't utter a word for a long while. Can origin power really merge with one another? Little Fat Cat's words were too shocking to him, and he needed time to accept it. The origin forces can indeed be fused. I'm very sure of this. Only after Nie Tian's expression calmed down did the little Fat Cat continue. The reason why the two ancestors arranged for 2 cultivators who had merged with their origins to fuse with each other was because they wanted their 2 kinds of origin power to fuse with each other. Nie Tian broke out in a cold sweat and his whole body was cold. He couldn't imagine what it would be like if 2 men who fused the origin forces were together. But he was very confused. Could 2 martial artists who fused the origin forces be together be able to fuse the 2 origin forces? The Fat Cat saw the confusion in Nie Tian's heart and said, The origin forces are very sensitive to each other. Even if they are different origin forces, there is still a strong reaction. For example, if two martial artists who stay together for a long time, the origin forces between them will be stronger. When the origin forces can sense each other to a certain extent, the two origin forces can fuse together. After listening to the fat cat's words, Nye Tian was even more confused. QL11 He already understood what the fat cat meant. When two martial artists were together, they didn't fuse with each other, but they were very close to each other so that the origin forces could sense each other. But he felt that this couldn't work at all. Because there were two origin forces in his body, the earth origin force and the dark origin force. These two origin forces were in his body and fused with his devil aura, so they could be said to be the closest. But he could feel that there was no so-called origin force sense between the two origin forces, and they were even repelling each other. But he could feel that there was no so-called origin force sense between the two origin forces, and they were even repelling each other. Could it be that the two origin forces in two people's bodies could sense each other just because they were close to each other? Thinking of this, Nye Tian felt that it was even more impossible. Nye Tian, the origin force sense between origin forces can't happen overnight. The fat cat knew what Nye Tian was thinking, and said with a faint smile, and different origin forces have different attributes. The Terra vein source and the heart of darkness in your body, one is earth origin force, and the other is darkness origin force. The origin force sense between them isn't weak, but it isn't strong either. Generally speaking, the two origin forces that restrain each other have the weakest origin force, such as light and darkness, water and fire. And the origin forces with similar attributes have stronger origin forces, such as water, wood, and light and thunder. But even if the two origin forces have stronger origin forces, it will take decades, centuries, or even tens of thousands of years for the origin force to sense each other. The time you fused with the Terra vein source and the heart of darkness is very short, and the two origin forces aren't even familiar with each other, so of course there won't be any origin force sense. When Nye Tian heard the fat cat's words, he frowned deeply, a look of shock on his face. It turned out that the origin force sense was so difficult that it would take tens of thousands of years. However, he still didn't understand what would happen after the two origin forces fused. Those two old ancestors definitely wanted the two origin forces to fuse together because they wanted the two origin forces to fuse together. The fat cat smiled and said, "As long as the two cultivators have the patience to stay together for tens of thousands of years, or even hundreds of thousands of years, it is still possible for the origin forces to fuse together." The corner of Nye Tian's mouth twitched and he thought to himself, how loving must two people be for them to stay together for hundreds of thousands of years? It would be fine if it was a man and a woman, but if it was two men who stayed together for hundreds of thousands of years, just thinking about it made him sweat. However, Nye Tian now believed that different origin forces could fuse together. However, in the next moment, he thought of another question, and his eyes trembled as he asked in surprise, "Fat, it is like different origin forces can fuse together. Does that mean that all 9 origin forces can be fused? If all 9 origin forces are fused at the same time, what will happen?" When the fat cat heard Nye Tian's words, its eyes trembled, and it shook its head in shock, saying, "I don't know." The question of fusing 9 origin forces, it had indeed never crossed its mind. However, what Nye Tian said was indeed possible.